Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand.
Afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's meeting of the Budget and Performance Committee, and in fact a new year for the Budget and Performance Committee. Can I just ask everyone to make sure that your electronic devices are turned off or to silent to avoid any interruptions? If I could ask our clerk, Hannah Barlow, have any apologies been received?
Thank you, Chairman. Apologies have been received from Assembly Member Cooper and Assembly Member Desai. Also, apologies have been received from Assembly Member Polanski, for whom Assembly Member Hamdashi is attending as his substitute, and Assembly Member Wilson is attending remotely on Zoom.
Great. We'll be fixing our technical problems with Assemblymember Wilson shortly. Welcome, James, new member of the committee, and welcome Ben Ali, substituting today. Just before we get to our main business this morning, which is about the Met Police budget and officers and so on, it's going to be very interesting. Got a quick bit of housekeeping. So can I ask the committee to note the recommendations set out at item 2 and ask if members have any other interest to declare? Good. Can I ask the committee to note the committee's membership, chairing arrangements and terms of reference and standing delegations of authority to me as chairman as agreed by the London Assembly at its annual meeting on the 11th of May 2026? No. Good. Can I ask the committee to confirm the minutes of the meeting of the committee held on the 19th of March 2026 to be signed by me as a correct record? Good. Summary list of actions. Can I ask the committee to note the completed and closed actions arising from its previous meetings and the additional correspondence sent? Good. And can I ask the committee to note the following responses that we have received from the Mayor of London to our letter on the 2026-27 Greater London Authority Group Budget Affordable Housing, and the response from the Mayor of London to our letter on the 26-27 Greater London Authority Group Budget? Good. Right. Finally, we got there. Our main item of business this afternoon, which is the Metropolitan Police Service funding and officer numbers. So if I could welcome our first panel this afternoon. We have Kaya Comer-Schwartz, who is the Deputy Mayor for Policing and Crime. Welcome. It might be your first time in this committee, actually, I think. Or maybe not. No, maybe the Police Committee. No, my apologies. Perhaps it's just my memory that is failing. That's entirely possible. We have Adrian Wright, who is the Interim Chief Finance Officer at the Metropolitan Police. And Amana Humayun, Chief Finance Officer at MOPAC. Welcome, everyone. So why don't I kick off with the first question, Deputy Mayor. When we look at police officer and PCSO numbers, which have fallen from a peak, so 35,731 in April 2023, and they're now down to around 32,570. So it's a sort of downward trend, really, over the last couple of years. To what extent do you think is that trend likely to continue, or are we stabilising at that new level?
Thank you. Yes, I recognise that due to nearly a decade of underfunding, there has been a reduction in officers. What we've worked on over the last 2 years is working with the Home Office to make sure that we've secured a total of £373.9 million, which in percentage terms is a 16% increase. This year, the focus is definitely on stabilising officers. So around the number that you mentioned, that's what we're working to.
So that's the combined. So this is one of the slight issues we sometimes get confusion about. So I think we're at, or the plan in the budget, my apologies, was to stabilise at 31,258, which I believe is just police officers, and then there's roughly about 1,300 PCSOs on top. So is that what we're looking at, or what you're talking about as the stabilising, the stable level that you think you're maintaining?
So yeah, we're on Met officers. We've got 33.013 for last year and 31.181, and I'm pretty sure that's inclusive of both staff and is that staff and.
That's only officers.
Oh no, that's officers. Yeah. So do you have the number for staff?
So on PCSOs.
My apologies,
No,
Adrian. There's a little. Apologies. Hold on. There's a little button with a person and a. Yep.
Sorry,
there we go.
It's my first time here.
Welcome.
So it's looking at March 26, it was 31,181 officers, 1,389 PCSOs, and then 11,558 staff.
Okay. So around about 31,100 and something, did you say, officers?
Yeah. Which is just slightly below the plan number that you described as 31,258, which was last year's closing plan.
Okay. Oh, so we've declined about another 100-ish, 150.
It's just the vagaries of exactly hitting attrition against recruitment rather than anything systemic. But yeah, that's the difference between the 31,258 and that figure.
Okay. And the I know the mayor in the past has talked about an ambition of 38,000 officers. That seems to have slightly faded. I'm not sure whether that's still the ambition, Deputy Mayor, but is that 38,000? Firstly, could you tell us, is that still the mayor's ambition? And secondly, is that ambition just warranted officers, or is that also including PCSOs?
I think that's inclusive of both. We put forward last year, because it was pre-spending review, a very ambitious budget as part of our kind of strategy to ensure that government was really aware of what London needs to be a fully kind of up to standard Met that we'd really, really want to see. Obviously, it was good that we got an increase in the money that we'd had previously, and this has led to the £373.9 million that we did receive. We continue to talk to government. We recognise that the assumptions that we put in, we were funded around 30 million less than we wanted to have at that stage. But as I said, we continue to talk to government about how important that funding is. So yes, we're working to stabilise for this year and recognise as well within that mix the manifesto pledges we've had around neighbourhood officers and government's ambition around neighbourhood officers and the work we've been doing to focus to make sure that we are making sure we're putting the most amount of officers in the front line as possible. So although the overall officer numbers have fallen, we've been able to get 561 officers back out into neighbourhood office.
Yeah, we'll come on. We have got a section, actually. I know that's a very important part of the Mayor's pledge, so we'll come on with a whole section just looking at the neighbourhood officer policing. I just want to sort of kick off really by understanding the headline figures. So over the last 2 years, we're down by about 2,000 or 2,500 police officers, something like that. Is there really an explanation of what's the cause of that?
Well, I think the explanation would be that since between 2010 and 2025, the funding increased only by 2% in real cash terms. So that's a real term reduction of 1.2 billion or 34%. So previous budgets have looked at, all other areas, and now sadly, and as last time I did come to this committee, we did discuss, sadly, tough choices had to be made last year, and that's why we're here.
You've talked about, a decade, which I'm sure in your mind corresponds with the Conservative government, but obviously we've not had a Conservative government for 2 years, and during that period we've lost something like 2,000 or 2,500 police officers. So I'm just curious what your explanation is for why it is that since we had a new government and lots of promises about police numbers, we seem to have gone down. We definitely have gone down, not up.
Well, as I just said, I think it's the cumulative impact of those years of underfunding and, other areas having to be being looked at. And sadly, last year was, not last year, the year before, it was felt that really the road on kind of making all of the other possible choices had been taken, and the tough choices had to be moved forward and through. And that's why we continue to have conversations with government about increases, and for the last 2 years those increases have happened, and we've got a 16% increase over those last 2 years. But we recognise the state in which the overall economy was found, but also policing.
Okay, so for all the positive conversations, nothing that's happened in the last 2 years has unwound the tough choices that were made previously?
No, the tough choices had happened at the start of those 2 years. Those were the conversations. However, as I've mentioned, over the 2 years, 25-26, we got an additional 231.2 million pounds, and last year an additional 142.7 million pound. And also, it's worth pointing out as well, for the first time in a long time, we also got an increase in the national and international capital cities grant as well. So moving in the right direction. We obviously want to work with government to go further, but as previously mentioned as well, I think it's worth noting that we're making sure that we're prioritising neighbourhood officers, and that's having a real impact in terms of crime-related performance.
But I think you just highlighted perhaps the mystery at the heart of this, which is why I was interested in looking at this at budget, because you've described lots of extra money that the Met has had from the government in the last 2 years, and the net effect of that is that we're down by about 2,000 to 2,500 police officers, and that seems like a puzzle, doesn't it?
I'm sorry, I can reiterate what I've just said if you want, but I think it's how big the hole was previously. The government is filling up that hole after a decade of underfunding, working with us. The Mayor has also doubled the amount and is now funding through increasing the council precept up to 25%. And the government has increased the money over the last 2 years to a point of 16%. So the money is going up, but recognising the demand of being a capital city and also those years of underfunding.
Forgive me, because the Met Police budget obviously is predominantly a headcount budget. So most of the money that comes in goes out within years. Not like, let's say, TfL, where they've got enormous capital projects and so on. The Met Police budget isn't like that. So when you talk about filling up a hole or something, you're not talking about a backlog of capital works. You're talking about each year's budget. Most of that budget is spent that year on the headcount for the wages and staff costs for all of the people. So there's no sense in which there's a backlog that moves from one year to another. So I don't understand, if there's more money in year from one year to the next, there's then more money to pay for staff in that next year. Why does that translate then to fewer staff and not more? More police officers. More money should translate to more police officers, more PCSOs, more staff, because most of the money goes on staff, or staff of all types. I mean, police officers and staff. So this is the puzzle I'm trying to understand. How is it that the amount of money has gone up in all those ways you've just described? You don't have to repeat those. And yet the effect of all of that is that we're down by thousands of police officers. And that seems to me a puzzle.
So, Amana will come in with additional detail. But, obviously, things don't stay static in the economy. So things like inflation go up, things like costs go up, things for equipment costs go up. You're right that primarily the Met budget is made from revenue, but it doesn't stay static in terms of any of the things that we all live through in terms of wages increases and the like. But Amana, you wanted to add?
I was going to mention the comment on inflation, which you've talked about. So if you take the stats that you quoted earlier, Deputy Mayor, on the funding increase actually under the previous government between 2010 and 2025, it did increase by 2% in cash terms, but in real terms, it's a reduction of 1.2 billion because it doesn't take into account inflationary rises elsewhere. And so you can't just look at it in absolute pound terms. You have to think about the impact of inflation. The other element I was going to talk about is the Met reserves. So the Met has been relying on its reserves, as you will have seen if you look at its reserves balance over the past 10 years, and how across both earmarked reserves and the general reserves, the overall balance has reduced substantially. And that's because the reserves did allow an element of buffer, and it allowed any areas of particular pressure to be met by the available reserves. But as you know, that's one-off funding. It's not replenished. Once it's gone, it's gone. We are now in a position where we have extremely limited reserves. We do have some earmarked reserves, but they're earmarked for specific intentional use, largely around transformation and ongoing transformation activity. And we have a minimum level of general reserve that we are required to maintain, like every police force in the country. And the benchmark requirement for the general reserve is set by CIPFA, and we are adhering to that, which is 2 to 3% of net revenue expenditure.
Okay, thank you very much. If I can just move on to a slightly different topic, Adrian, just thinking about the resource allocation since April 2023, what areas would you say within the Met have been prioritised and where have experienced the greatest reductions?
So As we described, and as you know, kind of around 80% of the cost is the workforce. So we're looking at the sustainable size of the workforce, and we've talked about some of the things that have affected that. So that is an area of priority. However, that's such a big cost driver that you need to look at your workforce levels in order to be sustainable. And the other point I just made was the increasing cost of capital financing, because you're right, the dynamic of our budget is very, very different to TfL, but we do have a borrowing-supported capital programme, and the costs of that are ticking up quite significantly over time, and that's a cost that's increasing well above inflation. So protecting, obviously, we have been increasing our investment in neighbourhoods and supported by the neighbourhood funding in that area. So that's an area of priority. And we've protected the funding that we need in order to be able to get after the New Met for London change programme and the New Met for London 2 change programme. Not to do everything that we'd like to do, but to do those core things in that programme that are important to transforming the Met.
Okay, I think we'll come on to some of those in a little while. Now, Assembly Member Small-Edwards. Oh, fair enough. In that case, we go to Assembly Member Hamdash.
Great, thank you very much. And mine's a question for Marna, if that's okay. So the GLA precept now funds around a quarter of the MPS budget, up from a fifth in 2016 to 2017. How sustainable is this trend, and what is the assessment of the long-term funding position if this continues?
Thank you. In terms of sustainability, once the precept is increased, it's essentially recurrent. So that level of funding is essentially guaranteed for future years. The question then becomes one of whether further precept increases are possible, feasible, likely in future years. And that's dependent on two factors. So one is whether we are given, well, the Police and Crime Commissioner is given permission essentially by the Home Office and MHCLG to increase the precept. So that's decision point one, which is outside of our control. And then the second is if that permission is allowed, whether it's taken up. So I think there's only 32% of police and crime commissioners in London who have raised the precept in every year of the mayoralty, and the current mayor is one of those. It wasn't increased at all under the previous mayoralty. So in terms of whether it's feasible, sustainable, the amount of funding currently funded by precept is sustainable, it's baked in, it's recurrent. Whether that's something that continues in future years depends on whether, firstly, that entitlement is provided for by the Home Office, and if the mayor in question then decides to increase the full amount.
Great. Just a quick follow-up from me. So is there something significant in the trend of the GLA funding going into the Met Police part of the budget and not into MOPAC, or providing long-term funding certainty for those schemes such as the Violence Reduction Unit or Crime Prevention and Victim Support Services?
I think your question points to the difficulty of balancing limited resources. I think it's a really fair question. If you look at, and apologies, I haven't got VRU numbers to hand. However, the VRU currently have a relatively stable funding model. So they experienced an increase in funding approximately 2 years ago, but over the past 2 years, and for the period of the remaining MTFP, the medium-term financial plan, we see it stabilising. A significant proportion of VRU funding also comes from the Home Office. And on that, again, the indications we've received is that for now it's stable, so not set to increase, and nor are they set to reduce. It's really difficult because we as in MOPAC, fund several services, many of which are statutory for victims and vulnerable Londoners. And the mayor and the deputy mayor in turn have a really difficult balance at every budget setting period as to how much of the overall budget, both in terms of the allocation that comes from Home Office and the amount determined by precept, is used to fund officers on the front line, really important transformation programmes in the Met, or retained for services to Londoners. And I think given the overall funding for policing over the past decade or so, what we've tried to do is strike the right balance and make sure we can fund police officers and workforce whilst not entirely decimating the budget for the victims of crime and the vulnerable Londoners. But at some point, something has to give. You can't fund absolutely everything. You can't fund every priority. So when it comes to MOPAC commitments, one of the ones that we're most mindful towards are the statutory responsibilities. So just to give two examples, MOPAC now funds the appropriate adult service, which is the provision of an appropriate adult for vulnerable adults who are taken into police custody. That's entirely demand-led. So where there's an individual that requires that support, that support has to be provided. That contract, that cost incurred by MOPAC has been higher than expected and higher than budgeted. And so that's created a pressure for the MOPAC budget, which we're trying to manage. Another example I'll give you is the SARCs. It's also referred to as the Havens, which is the Sexual Assault Referral Centres. So any victim, male, female, adult, child, of any sort of sexual crime can go to a SARC, and that's where they're supported, but also, more importantly, forensic evidence is taken, which is later relied upon in court. Again, that's a statutory service, which we're required to part fund with the NHS, and entirely demand-led, unfortunately. And demand has been high, and so we have to, of course, that's a priority funding area.
If I might add as well, it's important to recognise that the Mayor, where there has been areas of continual prioritisation and concern in terms of services like this year, not only on phone theft, but in terms of direct support for victims, especially in the violence against women and girls space. He's given additional money, 6 million, to make sure that we are supporting women and girls who've been the victims of tech-enabled violence against women and girls, and moreover, within a package of 29 million of different support services for victims of violence against women and girls. So, you know, where possible, you know, the Mayor prioritises those additional services, understanding the kind of new areas that will emerge, but also the ongoing need to support things like the grassroots FORG Fund, which primarily works for women through buy and fall services. So there is flex in what we do, and we try and use MOPAC's evidence and insight to push those areas as well.
Assembly-Member Harani.
Thank you, Chair. Just want to go back to some of the earlier questions around policing numbers, but also resources that are coming into the Met Police. So you've mentioned already the increase you've had in terms of the contribution from the National International Capital Cities Grant, but also the Home Office grant, the special grants, and the Mayor's element of the preset. And yet we've seen the police numbers going down. Do you have an alternative figure that you had or were working on if those other elements that are government elements, NIC and Home Office grants, didn't come through? And what would have the police officer numbers been in London were it not for that additional funding from central government? Would it be even worse in terms of the reduction, or were the figures predicated on other areas of Met spending?
Yes, I mean, the numbers would have to have gone down because, as we've just said, it's they're mostly revenue costs, and we know, obviously, from the impacts from last year where they have gone down. So if we hadn't got that money, they would have definitely gone down. But we can get you the exact figures.
And how would those changes have been made? So would it be not being able to recruit new officers when numbers went down, when officers left the force? Or retired, or were there any other backup plans in terms of meeting those gaps?
Yeah, so, I mean, Adrian might have more detail, but you'll know that the way the Metropolitan Police Service has to be set up is you rightly can't fire officers because of how essential they are. So it is about dialing down that pipeline for recruitment if they need to be shrunk, also moving into other specialist areas or areas that we have contracts for example, Heathrow. But Adrian, do you want to add?
Yeah, sure. So we need to recruit over 2,000 officers a year to stand still. So and the officers are the overwhelmingly biggest element of our cost base. So you're quite right that in order to manage our costs over a year, we'd recruit less officers against attrition as the biggest lever. However, we are looking at costs always look at costs across the piece. So we're looking at our staff posts equally with officer posts as we look at reductions and the non-workforce efficiencies, and we delivered another 75 million of non-workforce efficiencies in the last financial year, which was our target. But you're right on the big lever, which is that there's a natural attrition of officers. Ours is a little bit better than the national average, but it's still over 2,000 officers a year that we need to recruit. So we recruit less against that in order to manage the budget, but not just that, but that's the biggest lever.
Okay, and sort of going back to sort of my days as a councillor, but it's quite clear that over the last decade plus that reserves have been used to fund ongoing revenue costs. So what lessons are being learnt now from the Met in terms of budgeting? Because in the sort of local government, I don't know, you were a leader of a council before, Kaya, but in that world, spending reserves on ongoing costs is quite frankly, you present yourself with a structural problem. So what results are, or what lessons are being learnt at the moment?
Oh, yeah, I mean, definitely, and I think that's what Amana was alluding to earlier, is the real need to make sure that we have reserves. We know that reserves are obviously meant to be there to manage emergency situations or unforeseen situations. So it's right that we follow the CIPFA guidelines on having the 2 to 3% of reserves. But also, I think it's a reason that we really need to understand, and we talk to government about having that sustainable funding model so that we can bake in longer term issues and not have to fall back onto reserves. I would say as well, Adrian and his colleagues have really worked, I think, over the last 2 to 3 years on putting the Met's kind of finances in a much stronger position, so that there is greater understanding through our regular meetings on the kind of midterm financial positions, to understand where the kind of pressures are, where things are overspent across the different areas of the Metropolitan Police, but also where things need to be adjusted. But Amani, you wanted to ask?
You're absolutely right. Several lessons have been identified, and they kind of go both ways. And I'll explain what I mean. So there's one thing around not using a one-off funding source like reserves to fund recurrent pressures, and absolutely all of the recent requests to draw down against the reserves that the Deputy Mayor has received from the Met have been specifically to fund one-off pressures, not recurrent pressures, and that's something that we test before we submit a decision to the Deputy Mayor for approval. Our scheme of delegation requires that the Deputy Mayor signs off every drawdown of reserves, so the Met can't use reserve funding without the Deputy Mayor's permission, and she looks to me and my team for advice on whether it's a suitable proposal to draw down on reserves. And certainly all of the ones I can remember in the past couple of years have been funding requests for very specific one-off pressures rather than things that actually they're going to need to fund every year. So that's something that we check. But when I said the lessons have been learned both ways, the other element is I think the Met's reserve balance at one point, perhaps 4 or 5 years ago, was quite high, actually. And at that point, I think it would have been fair to apply criticism of, actually, why have you got such a high reserves balance? Why aren't you using some of this cash to modernise your policing service, to fund the front line? And so actually, the Met, just to elaborate on the Deputy Mayor's point, are so much better now in scrutinising their reserves balances, and there's at least once a year, but I think recently it's been more like twice a year, do like a reserve scrub, a review of their earmarked reserves, and make sure they have a really justified intentional use of their reserves balance. And if they haven't, it's basically released into the general reserve. because arguably it's being held on to without an earmarked purpose. So I think both those lessons have been learned, not to hold on to cash, and then when it is used as a reserves drawdown, it's done for a one-off pressure rather than a recurrent pressure.
Assembly Member Hall.
Thank you. Good afternoon. This is from Anna. How is the MPS approaching workforce and financial planning in the absence of confirmed future funding, and what scenarios is it planning for?
Thank you. It's not an unusual scenario for us, unfortunately, because we only really receive annual settlements. And so, as you know, that we're required to produce a 3-year medium-term financial plan. So as part of that, we try and base that plan on as realistic funding assumption as we can estimate. So, for example, our published gap for 27-28 is £125 million for the Met. And that's based on what we currently know in terms of Home Office funding levels. It's what we know around current levels of funding that we receive, but we know were always one-off and are due to come to an end. So as an example, the Met received £50 million at the end of 24-25 to be used in future years, and that's been used in 2 instalments, 25 million in 25-26, 25 million 26-27. So we know, for example, that that comes to an end. And so we take a realistic assessment of our funding. We know what our kind of committed expenditure levels are, particularly in non-workforce areas. So, for example, we know what it will take to complete New Met for London, what's required to complete our ongoing transformation programmes, and against that we're able to project the workforce, both the sort of requirement and also what's affordable.
You just mentioned the New Met for London. We're coming to that later. But you've just mentioned it. What figure will you need for that? New Met for London.
So the current figure is for this year is approximately 67 million from memory.
Okay.
Is what's
all right. We're coming back to that. You mentioned it, so
okay.
I find that interesting. Thank you. The MPS estate strategy specifically refers to, and I'll quote, the potential need to make further reductions in officer numbers. So was that written in with a particular figure in mind, or was it really more for flexibility?
I think more for flexibility. So I think that the estate strategy was published in December, and at that time we didn't have our confirmed total funding settlement for 26-27. As you know, our final budget for 26-27 is lower than the level that we published in our draft budget and anticipated. So it's about £32 million lower. And as I've mentioned, we all also know that our gap for 27-28 at the moment is 125 million, if nothing else changes, and hopefully it will in terms of funding levels. But should our gap remain 125 million for 27-28, there is no way of closing that gap other than workforce changes.
I was surprised to see that, because normally you're very careful with figures you put in, and you were completely wrong twice. What level of fluidity in officer numbers is factored into the estate strategy, both up and down, when that was produced?
So the estate strategy is based on the level of workforce that we had at the time and an assessment that there may be a need going forward to reduce workforce levels if nothing else changes in terms of funding. I don't think we had any particular volumes of workforce other than the level that we're currently at, and sort of a reasonable assessment of marginal reductions depending on funding levels, unless, Adrian, you correct me.
No, given the timing of the estate's strategy, it wasn't configured on a particular level of workforce reduction. It just looked at the likely trend over the spending review period, given what we anticipated might be the future funding levels, but with uncertainty to it. And is obviously constrained by the amount that we can afford from a capital perspective as well. It certainly doesn't allow us to grow the size of the estate. And when we talked about what it would take to be a larger Met, if the investment was there, then there would be a capital requirement that came alongside that. So it just looks at the fact that we need to kind of maintain the existing estate and kind of keep that kind of safe and open for business, but it wouldn't allow for growth. But it wasn't predicated on a specific level of officer numbers beyond that point.
So it wouldn't allow for growth, but you don't have the figures that you were estimating for at that time?
Well, it was aligned to maintaining the current level but looking at the prospect that over the spending review period we might firm up plans that would mean a reduction in those numbers rather than standing still.
Okay, I'm sure we'll come back to that. Thank you.
Assembly Member Wilson.
Thank you, and good afternoon. So looking at the budget, and I know most of it is sports related, but I think Adrian.
Sorry, Alex, you're very faint, Alex. I don't know if you're able to sit closer to your mic or tweak the knob a bit and make it a bit louder.
Is that better?
Maybe.
Okay, and there's also I can hear myself echoing. Well, I'll try. So what I was going to ask, Adrian, you mentioned that cost of.
I can't. Sorry, Alex. We can't really hear it. I'm not sure whether it's faint or actually maybe whether it's slightly breaking up. It's like everyone. I mean, I'm struggling to hear it, and everyone's looking at me with a slightly puzzled face. I don't. There is a helpful suggestion. You could try shouting. I don't know.
Let me leave this one. I'll come in on myself in the next question, and in the meantime, I'll dial out a bit and try and come in on the phone rather than the computer.
Okay, I think you said you're going to try on the next question.
Yeah.
Okay, I'll leave you to do that. In that case, Assembly Member Georgiou.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Madam Deputy Mayor, if funding remains constrained over the medium term, how prepared is the MPS to adapt to a lower level of police officer numbers?
I mean, I think that the MPS has shown that they are adaptable to having to work at lower levels. The Met have set up something they refer to as the engine room, that through the tough choices process has really enabled them, and I know we're going to come on to it later to talk about the workforce databases that they've put in place to kind of understand and manage their workforce numbers a lot better. One of the things that I was really reflective of when I started was the previous Deputy Commissioner, Lynn Owens, had a real motivated energy to make sure that the workforce numbers were better in terms of the understanding, and that's really come on very leaps and bounds. So the process through the tough choices and the learning that's happened through that, I think has enabled greater confidence in terms of the adaptability.
But realistically, you as the Deputy Mayor for Policing and Crime and the Mayor of London, if we do see further reductions, what will your priorities be? Your personal priorities? Red lines, we'll call them red lines. What will your red lines be?
Yeah, I understand. My priorities will definitely be the continued work on neighbourhood policing. It's seen some really positive results in terms of the things that Londoners have told us through MOPAC, through the public surveying we do, that they care most about, whether that be theft from person being reduced by 22%, bike theft down by 8%, obviously violent crime coming down as well, homicides last year being at a record low. So those neighbourhood policing and the strengthening of neighbourhood policing will continue to be a priority, as well as public protection. The work that the Met has done through the Mayor's kind of instigation through HMIC to improve its investigation of public protection, having lower caseloads and higher officer investigations has had really strong results, and those are those two things that I would give continual priority to.
Just before I come on to my next question, you've just cast out some statistics. Over what time period were those? Well,
I mentioned obviously the homicide rate.
Your mic. That's all right.
Obviously, last year, the homicide rate I referred to was conclusive of the 25-year.
So that's 1 year, and the other ones? Over what time period?
And then the ones that I've just referred to are comparisons between April 26 and the previous year.
Right, okay. So, but those are all for 1 year periods?
Yeah, that tends to be the way that we measure them because of how much fluctuation you have. So it's good to have year-to-year comparisons.
Okay, thank you. And so therefore you've stressed neighbourhood policing would be the priority. So what would not be the priority then? Because obviously you've spoken a lot about tough choices. So what would be lower down the pecking order to protect and defend?
Well, I think, obviously, I'm conscious, Assembly Member Georgie, we're now talking in hypothetics. So it would really depend on the levels that we're talking to. I mean, obviously, as well, it's important for us to get the operational expertise of the Met in terms of what they feel the areas are changing or demand is less or more in. But I also am conscious that there are areas that have had really successful work in terms of civilianisation. So moving serving officers back into frontline policing and backfilling them, for a lack of a better term, with staff, which obviously have lower overheads.
Right, okay. So in summary, the answer is frontline policing is the priority.
Neighbourhood policing, yeah.
Yeah, I agree with you. So don't worry, it's a good thing. I hope it comes to fruition. And right, so last question from me, Chair, on this section. So London currently has over 400 fewer police officers than when the current Mayor of London was first elected. As he celebrates his 10-year anniversary, do you think this is something he should reflect on as a failure?
I think given the 14 years of underfunding that he's had, I think he's rightly should be proud of stepping up to the mark in there, taking difficult decisions around the precept, doubling the amount of money there, funding over a quarter of the budget. That's not an easy decision to take, and he took it to make sure that there was continual funding for the Metropolitan Police. Obviously, the work that he's done, as I previously mentioned, around making sure that public protection is prioritised as well. And I think given some of the statistics that I've just mentioned, I think, yes, police officers are coming down, but working alongside the Commissioner in resetting, fixing the foundations of the Met and continuing to prioritise culture, transformation and performance, there are reasons to be proud as well.
Well, I failed to wrap my head around it because Boris Johnson, when Mayor of London, the previous Mayor of London, managed to keep numbers higher than than this current Mayor has over the last 10 years. And if you take the numbers that the Mayor of London, seems every Labour Assembly member seems to have presented over that time period, probably lots of Labour leaders of London boroughs, you would assume that there was no money for Met policing whatsoever, but yet he managed to keep numbers above where the current Labour Mayor of London has managed to keep his numbers. So how has that managed to work out in that way? Boris Johnson left it a certain amount. 10 years later, Sadiq Khan has 400 fewer than when Boris Johnson left office as Mayor of London. So I can't wrap my head around all of these cuts, so you say, or real terms cuts, how he managed it and this current Mayor of London hasn't. So just financially, can you explain that one to me? Because I'm not quite sure.
I mean, as previously mentioned, things like inflation don't stay still. Things that Amana mentioned around the continual growth in pressure on things, as well as what Adrian mentioned around capital capital borrowing costs, continue to put additional pressure on the budget. Yes, over the past 14 years, the increase was only at 2%. That really is a real-time cut. So actually, I would say that given that it's the previous mayor had, it's a marginal, we're marginally ahead of the position from the previous mayor at 31.049. And as I said previously, that we continue to work with government to make sure that we are seeing those increases, and that is working in terms of not only the core grant, but also additional funding for projects and the NIC, that we have worked really hard to stabilise the workforce.
Well, with the greatest respect, Madam Deputy Mayor, so 2013-2014, Boris Johnson had around 4.15 billion. 2014-15 lower, 2015-16 lower, yet he managed to keep it well above where the current Mayor of London is. And oh, look, funny here, 2021, double that amount, 2021-22, still double that amount, 22-23, still double that amount, 22-24, still double that amount, 24-25, similar to what it was in 2021. So I really can't wrap my head around double or significantly more in terms of money, but yet still not the same result in terms of net expenditure.
Sure, but I would say as well he took different choices, like the number of police stations that he sold off. And
the mayor of, this current Mayor of London hasn't sold off any police stations, has he? Because the last time I checked, he's quite a few.
Well, I think if you did a direct comparison, Boris Johnson sold off a lot more. But those are different choices and in a different context. And, you know, we're in a position now where after 14 years of underfunding, we've got to this position. And we're doing all we can to make sure that those officers are in the right places.
So Boris Johnson, just on the point of choices, does that mean Boris Johnson made good choices to keep frontline policing and Sadiq Khan has made bad choices because we've had a reduction of 400 over his 10 years?
Well, we're going to come on to it, I believe, in a minute, but when it comes to frontline officers, we've increased the number of officers in neighbourhoods, and that's having a real impact in terms of crime performance.
Okay, well, I'll leave it there, Madam Deputy Mayor, but thank you for your time. Thank you, Chair.
Assembly Member Hamdash.
Great, thank you. So I'm conscious of Sir Mark Rowley's comments about the focus on police numbers risking distorting focus. So, Adrian, I just wanted to ask, does the Met Police have a sense of what other measures or KPIs we should be looking at to determine kind of outputs and outcomes?
So, well, I think you can look at some of the performance data as Kaya was talking about. And I think what Sir Mark was saying is within a given resourcing envelope, you can only sustainably spend so much of that on workforce because you need to properly equip that workforce. We need to invest more in technology, for example. We need to make sure we've got a sustainable plan for the estate as well as other things. So although with more investment you would want to increase the workforce, absolutely, there's a point where you need to spend money on other things other than the workforce in order to have the right balance and the right workforce mix.
We go again to Assembly Member Wilson, but this time successfully.
Let's hope so. Can you hear me now?
Yeah, I think so.
Great. Okay, it's still echoing massively in mind. In fact, Assembly Member Hamdash has asked a very similar question to what I was going to ask at this point, which is your attention to what I thought in the briefing note were two slightly contradictory quotes from the Commissioner. One where it's focusing on officer numbers, risk distorting priorities, but on the other hand, another quote where he's saying that the loss of officers over the past few years means that sustaining improvements within a shrinking organisation is challenging. I just wondered, particularly Deputy Mayor, what your personal view is, which of those two quotes is closer to the truth?
It's no use if you can't hear me as well. Assembly Member Wilson, are you saying where across the balance of workforces versus non-workforces would I prioritise?
Yes, it seems to me that those two slightly contradictory positions, one suggesting that the headcount isn't the most important thing, but on the other hand, the other quote suggesting that losing the headcount is challenging to continue the improvements you want to make. So just wondering if you can kind of steer sort of your view which of those is more important.
Okay, thank you. So I would say I think it's obviously in all things balance. Obviously, headcount is really important because we all know that Londoners really prioritise the visibility of policing, especially in neighbourhoods, and without policing being able to do the investigative work they need to do and support victims, we're not bringing about the justice that we'd want to see. But that needs to be enabled. That needs to be enabled by things like the right equipment, the right data services, the right infrastructure, the right vehicles. So I don't think I would never prioritise. I mean, workforce has to be a key priority, but it's recognising, and I think this is something that the Commissioner really does recognise. That's why he's gone so far in New Met for London in terms of fixing the foundations, that one can't happen without the other. And when he came in, that balance was too far the other way. And so it is really important that we work closely with the Met to get that balance right, because otherwise we'll be left in the previous state that before the Commissioner came in. So it's trying to get the right level of balance to make sure that the officers have the infrastructure that they need to successfully be able to do their work.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chair, and good afternoon. Before I just do my main question, just to head back to the questioning from Assemblymember Georgiou, if I may, Deputy Mayor, and you spoke about where your red lines were or what your priorities are and all of this, and then refused to be drawn into hypotheticals, but you must be having discussions with the Met at the moment regarding areas where spend could be reduced.
So in creating this year's budget, you'll see that it's outlined in the budget that we've taken for a kind of 3-area process to reaching a balanced budget, that being obviously the main funding streams, but also how we bring about savings, hopefully through the use of technology, and we set aside £30 million to do that, to be able to drive efficiencies through that funding, and that going well, recognising that those have to realise cashable savings and efficiencies, us not being able to have to take some of the difficult decisions taken in previous years, but we are conscious and contingent on those factors.
Yeah, but if that doesn't, and we all hope that it does go as you hope, if that doesn't happen, what areas are we looking at in terms of potential frontline cuts? Further reductions to arms units, for example, further reductions to the dog units, closures of some police stations, reducing the hours along the lines of what the Mayor originally wanted to do. What sorts of things are you looking at and talking about now? Not hypothetically, now.
I mean, I think we'd obviously have to revisit some of the previous options that were looked at, but also, making sure that we have gone as far as we can with the civilianisation that we talked about previously. That's why the work that we're doing around technology is important. So it would have to be kind of seen across the round, obviously continuing to work with Adrian and his team to make sure that we are really driving commercial procurements in the right way. Are we pushing those negotiations as hard as we can? We do that anyway, but just really, we all know, we're really conscious of where we need to get to by the end of next year and the potential financial situation we might find ourselves in. So we're definitely alive to that, and that's why we continue to actively have conversations with government as well.
So we might we might, and I appreciate it's hypothetical, this one, but we might be looking at things like further reductions to police front counters, in either entirely enclosing them or in their operational hours. That's not off the table.
We want to make sure that we're doing all we can to get to a situation where that is avoidable, and we're doing the work to do that.
Okay, thank you. We touched on this, exactly this question. Question 4. City Hall now funds around a quarter of the Met's budget, up from a fifth in 2016-17, while the council tax policing precept has nearly doubled. How sustainable do you think that trend is?
As Amana answered to Assemblymember Hamadash, it's sustainable in terms of it's recurrent and the kind of parameters of that. It's something the Mayor obviously prioritises, is the safety of Londoners. So, but I'm very conscious that that is an active decision that he has to take every year. So with those caveats, it's reasonably sustainable.
Okay, so as we slide down the electoral razor blades towards the next elections, do you think it's possible that the Mayor will be continuing to raise the council tax precept to such an extent, or will he be taking the foot off the gas, if I can mix the metaphors? Tom Lehrer, that's sliding down the electoral razor blades, is the thing, but there we go.
From razor blades to sliding. I know that the Mayor has, throughout his term, taken the very difficult decision. We all know that council tax raises it's a regressive tax, it's a difficult decision. But he has to, if there's too many dependables for me to give that answer, he has to take that decision every year.
Fair enough. And just finally, on the NICC funding discussions that you mentioned earlier, how are they going?
As I do in committee, I make sure to mention them often when I'm talking to the policing minister, for example. I mean, I think we've all seen in this year how important it is that we get NIC funding, whether it be public order, football matches, state visits, London and the police force hold pressures that nowhere else in the country does. So it's really important that that carries on. Obviously, the government increased the NIC by 30%, and we'll continue to talk to them about how important it is.
Okay, and given the unfortunate drubbing that the Labour Party were giving at the last council elections just a month ago, do you think that that might sharpen the minds of ministers to give a bit more money to London, or are they going to risk further electoral failure as the election cycle continues?
All I can say is that we make sure to make, like, the Mayor of London prioritises the safety of London, and his election, you've said it yourself, he's served 10 years as the Mayor of London, and it's really important that those voices are listened to, and we continue to talk to government to make sure that that's heard. He's prioritised policing and safety through his budgets. So we continue to lay out to government why it's important.
Okay, hopefully they'll listen. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I'm just looping back in this section to an exchange that Assemblymember Hall had with Amana and the Deputy Mayor. So coming back to the funding settlement from February, which was £32 million lower than MOPAC budgeted for in January, which in turn was £23 million lower in January than MOPAC forecast in November. Madam Deputy Mayor, are you and the Mayor not embarrassed that the settlement from the new government, the one that's supposed to be the good guys, gave so much less than you and he expected? The MOPAC's normally prudent assumptions were shown to be too high twice. And the reason I raise it is because Assemblymember Hall left it as sort of a departing comment with Amana before, so I just thought I'd give you a chance to address it.
That's kind of you.
I'm very kind.
I know.
Yeah.
We obviously submitted the budget before the final figures, and that's always slightly the issue with the way the budget falls, is we're trying to set a budget based on assumptions before having the funding. We have to be ambitious in that. Yes, it was £32 million less than we had assumed. What I will say is those conversations continue. We've had previously funding come in later in the year, so we'll carry on pressing on that. I think that it would be wrong of us not to try and outline a case of what would be, a positive, workable budget and try and work from there. So we continue to do that. But Amana, did you want to come in?
Yeah, I might have to fact check you there, because I don't recall the 23 million short figure. So overall, our settlement for 26-27 is £32 million short of where we expect it to be.
Right.
So that I accept.
Yes.
I'm not sure I follow the 23 million.
That's fine. That was just on a
element.
previous assumption, but we'll come back to that. But my question to you, Madam Deputy Mayor, were you not disappointed on the £32 million being short than your assumptions?
I think disappointed is obviously we're disappointed. We set the budgets. We try and work actively to make sure that we're putting a proposal forward that is in line with what we believe we need to do the work that officers do really well every day. But that's also why we're not giving up on the conversation. So that's why we continue to talk to government, recognising the continual needs of London and the need for us to get there. I think given that we've had £373.9 million in total increase over the last 2 years, that's a 16% increase. There's, we've proven that working with government is positive.
There are always two sides to everything. So I think the other thing I'll remind you of is that our 26-27 draft budget, contained, from memory, about £100 million of assumptions. So yes, not all of it materialised, but one example of very positively received growth was the fact that the neighbourhood policing grant doubled in 26-27 compared to the previous year. The specific area in which I think our assumption didn't materialise was that we were hoping that the 30% increase to NIC received in the previous year would materialise again. And so we put in an ambitious assumption specifically around that. That was the component that didn't materialise. So it was essentially held static. Okay. But there were other areas of quite significant growth year on year.
Thank you both. Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Assembly Member Hall.
Thank you. This is to the Deputy Mayor. How confident are you that the Police and Crime Plan and the new Met for London Phase 2 can be fully delivered within the current budget?
Yep, so we, as previously mentioned, I've got £63 million to deliver new Met for London and a capital budget of £94 million. Obviously, I said we regularly, that's the money we've allocated for that, and we regularly have conversations with the Met on how that progresses. I think it's last year, I believe, at the end of the year, there was a slight underspend, and we were consciously pushing on that with new Met for London 2 coming out and having the Met is working up specific KPIs for new Met for London 2. We have improved confidence in their ability to spend and drive transformation on top of the projects they have delivered within new Met for London 2 so far.
All right, thank you. Further to you not approving the MPS Unified Operational Analytics contract, the Mayor's spokesman said, and I'm quoting, a broader question remains over whether a company's values and ethics should be considered during public procurement. The Mayor believes Londoners would want public funding to go only to companies that share the city's values. And I asked you before, and I'll ask you again, what are the London's values, and how would this contract have been in conflict with these?
So I want to be really clear, and it builds on my previous answer around the work we've done with the Metropolitan Police Service to make sure that the use of technology does bring about a more efficient and effective police service. That the reason that I did not take forward the decision on the unified operational analytics was that I was concerned that the process followed by the Met had not ensured demonstrable value for money, and I had concerns that the scheme of delegation required by the Met to attain MOPAC's approval in terms of the procurement strategy had not been done in this case. And that being said, this prevented me from taking that decision at the time, but we continue to support the Met's ambitions around using technology to improve delivery of operational functions, and we're having active conversations with them about next steps.
Well, I'm pleased about that, but can you actually answer the question, what are London's values, and how would that, or this contract, have been in conflict with these? Or are you telling me they're not in conflict?
I've outlined the reasons I took the decision. Do you want me to separately define what I believe London's values are?
I'm asking you what the Mayor went when he said he only wants to do contracts with companies that actually go along with London's values. I was wondering what he meant.
I don't think that that's what he said. We're all conscious that we have to...
It is what he said. You and I went through this last time, and your answer was, I don't think that's what he said. Well, it is.
Well, I know,
so what did he mean by that?
London values. You wanted me to give you a definition of
what did he mean by that? When you're looking at a contract, what did he specifically mean? He'll only give contracts to people that share the city's values. What did he mean by that?
He didn't say that, so I can't answer that question.
Well, he did. So did the Mayor share his views on Palantir with you before you vetoed this contract?
I can reiterate that I didn't approve the contract on Unified Operation Analytics because I was concerned at the process and the demonstration of value for money.
Again, that's not the question. Did the Mayor share his views on that company with you before you vetoed it?
No.
He didn't?
We didn't
discuss it? Oh, that's interesting.
Because it's slightly, as I was going to previously say, we all know under the current Procurement Act that that's not something that we'd have to take consideration of under the Procurement Act of 2023. What's really important in taking these decisions is the right processes are followed, that we can demonstrate that, especially with public money, that there's value for money and competitive processes aligned with that. We're, as I said, continuing to talk to the Met about how we can take forward a procurement process that does that.
So you didn't discuss the contract with the Mayor, fine. The letter said MOPAC was not satisfied the Met had and I'm quoting, adequately ensured or demonstrated value for money. So what specific evidence or benchmarking was deemed not sufficient in the MPS submission?
I think our concern was around affordability, given the long discussions we've had today about the pressures on the Metropolitan Police's budget, but also through the process, MOPAC wasn't usually shown a procurement strategy that enables us to test whether a competitive procurement process has happened. That didn't happen in this case. So we weren't able to understand fully how this project, which is a significant amount of money, had been assessed and competitively procured to make sure that the right levels of competition that would drive value had been demonstrated.
Okay, so there was no specific benchmarking.
Well, we didn't get to that stage because, as I said, we haven't been able to have the usual process that we would usually have in order to look at a competitive process. And those are the conversations we're now taking forward in how we can take a procurement process that would enable us to look at that.
Okay, so did you receive any legal advice about whether proceeding with the procurement or not?
We regularly take legal advice on
So you
this
did
issue.
on this specific case?
Yep, as we regularly do.
Okay, so you're looking to talk to them again as to see if you can get something that will work?
Yeah.
I mean, many of us that saw what they'd achieved were absolutely stunned by how quickly they'd got information out of existing information, and were impressed by that. Were you impressed by what they delivered?
I haven't seen that. I believe
You must have done, because we all have.
You went, didn't you?
Some MOPAC board members have seen the project that you're referring to, CSIE. We've seen it in practice. I understand that the Met have extended an invitation to see it in operation to some LPB members. I wasn't aware that members of the Assembly have seen it. That's just one example, of course. So the CSIE piece of work, which is the cultural standards and performance of their own workforce, was one of the components that will be continued under Unified Operational Analytics, and we hope will continue to be pursued once the process is followed properly and a decision resubmitted.
Well, I hope so, because the Commissioner said technology is the new front line. When we can see what a company like that can do, and there must have been savings built into the whole new Met for London, given the savings that this particular company could have brought. Were there not? Savings by using a company such as this?
I believe that part of the motivation of bringing it together was to deliver savings. Obviously, we'd want to test the deliverability of those savings through the work, but as I said, this is an ongoing process that we're working through.
Okay, well, I look forward to you at some point being able to tell me what London's values are in respect to this. Thank you, Chair.
Just clarify, Deputy Mayor, so it was not then... Sorry? Is it not on?
No.
The button, the red light came on.
Yours is still on, Susan.
Oh. Is that any better?
Yes.
Oh, I've got 2 red lights now. Seems to be the correct number of red lights. Okay. So you can help me clarify, Deputy Mayor. So on this software procurement, it's nothing to do with Palantir, it's nothing to do with that company or its values or connections or anything else. It was purely, and you would then presumably be happy to use that company as much as any other in future. It was purely that there was a process that wasn't followed correctly in this case. Is that my understanding? Because that's not quite how it's been perceived in the media, I think.
Yes, that's correct. We have a process, the scheme of delegation, and that process was not followed in this case. And if it had been, in terms of be able to present a procurement strategy to us, we would have tested certain things. We would have been able to shape that as the incumbent executive. And that didn't happen in this case. We have concerns about, therefore, how we can demonstrate value for money on behalf of Londoners, and that's where we are. We've told the Met that we're very keen to work closely with them to take forward a new procurement operation.
Okay. Just briefly then, can you explain why, what's your theory about why the Met didn't procure such a large contract correctly?
I mean, I can't theorise on... I'm conscious that there's a huge amount of pressure and that they want to work at pace. I think it's really important, and I've said this to the Met, that we want to make sure that we are supporting that pace, but we need to be brought in, given that ultimately we are the decision makers, alongside that, so that we can be in a state to take I can be in a state to take those decisions fully informed and feeling confident that we have enacted our responsibilities.
Is that a polite way of saying you think they did a rush job and cut corners?
No, I wouldn't say that. I'm conscious that they, have taken the decisions they've made, and that I feel like we have had several conversations with them about the work. For example, the CSIE. Obviously, we've continued to do our oversight and scrutiny work that we do on projects around that. But I am conscious that in this case, the process was deviated from. What's really important to me now is a way for us to move forward, given how important it is that we get to a stage that we can all realise the ambitions that we set out in the budget.
Okay. Adrian, can I just ask quickly then, are you clear about what went wrong? Like, what were the steps that were not followed and what you would do differently next time?
So, I mean, this is something we're discussing with MOPAC. Clearly, as Kyra has said, we're trying to move this all forward at pace as part of our plan to invest in. Sorry.
Apologies, yeah, if you could maybe just aim your microphone down so the end is pointed at your mouth a bit, or possibly, I'm not sure you're...
Yeah, let's try again.
Great, thank you.
What I was saying was this is something we're discussing with MOPAC to try and understand how we can move this forward as quickly as possible. We're on a compliant process from a commercial perspective. I think Kai is talking about the scheme of delegation. So we want to understand how we can have a new process and move forward as quickly as possible with this.
So it sounds like you're not clear what you did wrong, because they're saying you did something wrong and they had to veto the process, and you're saying if you're having discussions to understand what you did wrong, that tells me you don't know what it was. Which seems like an odd thing in a £50 million contract.
So it's hard for me to fully answer the question. I understand that Kai has said that the procurement strategy and the scheme of delegation requirements around the approval of that as distinct from the procurement is the issue that MOPAC have raised. So we need to work through that with them.
But so is the Met's view that you did follow the process, as far as you know? I'm just trying to understand, because obviously MOPAC's view or the Deputy Mayor's view is that this is nothing to do with Palantir, this is a process problem and the process wasn't followed. And I'm just trying to understand, if I can be honest, I'm not clear on what it is that they think has gone wrong. So hence I was asking you if you know what's gone wrong and what you would do differently. And I'm not sure that you're clear on what you would do differently to avoid a repeat.
So I think that's the subject of ongoing discussions at the moment.
But at this moment, you're not clear what went wrong.
I just don't like the sound of this at all. I don't know that the police are saying that they did everything correctly, but just supposing they do say that. Who picked it up at MOPAC to say, hang on a minute, Deputy Mayor, there's a problem here? Who picked that up?
Under, I think it's Section 35 of the Police Reform and Social Responsibility Act, the Commissioner has to secure value for money. And under a separate section of that same Act, the PCC, essentially the Deputy Mayor, has got to hold him to account for that, for securing value for money. One of the ways in which we do that is our scheme of delegation, which delegates from the Mayor to the Deputy Mayor and to the Commissioner the ability to spend. As you're aware, all spend proposals in excess of £500,000,
Yep.
500k, have to be approved at business case stage by the Deputy Mayor. So that's an absolute black and white. Are you going to spend more than 500k? If the answer is yes, the procurement strategy for the business case has to be put to the Deputy Mayor. The only caveat to that is that if your proposed spend is less than 500k, but the nature of it is novel, contentious or repercussive, the financial threshold doesn't apply. So it could be below 500k, but if it's novel, contentious, it needs to be approved by the Deputy Mayor. In this case, there was an element of working at pace. So just to go back to our earlier conversation, because it's relevant, we found out relatively late in the budgeting process that our budget, our final allocation for 26-27 was going to be £30 million short. Okay, we found that out January time, and we continued lobbying government, still hopeful we might get that £30 million gap plugged. It wasn't plugged. The Met then moved at pace to identify what can we do, how can we deliver in 26-27 with £30 million less funding. Their proposal for that is to use technology in a really innovative way that allows it to live with £30 million less funding. Now, in the course of all of that, they tried to move at pace to put in place a procurement for a piece of work without formally submitting a decision to the Deputy Mayor. So the decision that was meant to come to the Deputy Mayor was to set out the strategy for proceeding with the UOA. That didn't happen. There were other conversations. So, for example, there were EXCO conversations around the Met proceeding with UOA. MOPAC attend those meetings. So we were conscious of what the Met was intending to do, but expecting a decision to be received. That decision wasn't received. So to address the issue that caused the Deputy Mayor to refuse the decision, to address that going forward, a decision needs to be put forward by the Met on its procurement approach for UOA. And under the scheme of delegation, which is published, it's a published document, the Deputy Mayor can contribute her views on the procurement strategy. So, for example, she might require that certain criteria are taken into account by the Met when they're considering different suppliers to a piece of work. She might have views on the weightings that should be attached in the success criteria. That opportunity wasn't afforded on this occasion.
I tell you what I don't understand. You were in front of us a couple of days before all this. I was talking to the Mayor about it in Mayor's Question Time, and you waited until the end of Mayor's Question Time so we couldn't ask him. I'm sure if we ask the Met, they'll think that they've done it exactly right. It went through the right framework, and it did, didn't it, Adrian? It went through the right framework.
I was trying to draw a distinction between the commercial frameworks, and we've used government frameworks for that.
Yeah, I know.
A compliance strategy, and clearly Kaya and Amana are explaining how the scheme of delegation works, and therefore, in going forwards, we will obviously need to submit a procurement strategy as the first step in addressing this.
All I know is we haven't got much time now, so we'll stop. But we will come back to this because there's something that just does not seem right here. It's very unpalatable. Thank you, Chair.
How about a forest of hands going up? I've got Assembly Member Georgiou.
Thank you. Amana, was the business case on this robust before it even got to the Deputy Mayor?
The business case, as far as we've assessed it, was robust in some elements. So when you consider a business case, you look at things like possible benefits of the investment.
No, I don't mean to be... We've all gotten to where we are. I think we generally know the process of recruitment and where weightings begin and end.
Procurement rather than recruitment,
and recruit. But in your professional opinion, was the business case robust enough by the time it got to the Deputy Mayor?
In my assessment as CFO, as an advisor on all financial matters to the Deputy Mayor, it lacked in some areas. So one example is affordability. So a confirmed budget source for the prospective length of the contract, I felt wasn't robustly defensible.
And that was expressed prior to it going to the Deputy Mayor?
Essentially, it was... yes, yes, that's right. So it was. We received a business case. We reviewed the business case. My response on reviewing the business case is that I cannot confirm affordability for the duration of the proposal, and that was part of my advice to the Deputy Mayor.
Right. Okay.
Which is a valid value for money consideration that you would expect me as CFO to assess.
Absolutely. I just. You know, it's more of a comment. if I was sitting on that side of the table, that's what I would have led with at the beginning of all of this. But anyway, I'll leave it there, Chair. Thank you.
Thanks. Assembly Member Roberts.
Thank you. Deputy Mayor, when did this decision get taken? Were you having these discussions before the Police and Crime Committee of the 20th of May, or did you have these discussions after we questioned you and then questioned the Mayor?
When did I take the decision?
No, when did the discussions start?
Well, there's been ongoing discussions. It came up in PCC.
Yeah.
But the decision was after PCC.
Okay. And did you change your mind as a result of the discussions at PCC and the Mayor's questioning at question time?
No, I think the decision was taken by Mayor's question time. So, no.
Okay.
Obviously...
So was it taken between the committee and Mayor's question time, the 24 hours between?
I mean, I couldn't...
Well, it's only a couple of weeks ago.
I think so.
So you'd made the decision not to go ahead with Palantir at the time that we had the committee, the Police and Crime Committee?
No, I think it was after.
After
I mean, what I will say is obviously that was on the back of other conversations and processes and things that happened to that point.
Okay, so as a direct result of the questioning at this committee, you changed your mind. Is
No.
that fair? No? PCC, sorry, not budget. I apologise.
No.
So PCC, you went into PCC, everything was fine. You went out of PCC, you
No.
changed your mind, and therefore it was changed before Mayor's question time. It's what you just said.
No, that's not
Okay.
what I mean at all. We obviously, as we have just been discussing, there's a process in which we were following. We were testing things like affordability, value for money, whether the process had been adhered to, and that's how I made my decision.
Okay, so when did you make the decision? It's a really fundamental point, because if you came into the committee and we asked you a lot of questions about this and you claimed that your mind was still open on the matter, so either you had made the decision and your mind was not open on the matter, or you had not made the decision and therefore you were able to have the open mind. So what did you make the decision before the Police and Crime Committee or after the Police and Crime Committee?
Assembly Member Roberts, to my memory, we weren't answering questions.
We spoke a lot about Palantir, and
we
you seemed to
spoke a
defend
lot
the
about
decision.
Palantir.
Yeah, you seemed to
But
defend the decision.
we weren't talking about the exact procurement. We weren't talking about value for money process. We weren't talking about procurement processes. We weren't.
No, we were discussing about the ethics of Palantir, but you could have quite clearly said we will be blocking this contract at that committee if you'd made that decision already, and then you could have spared a lot of time of the Deputy Commissioner answering questions on it. It's a really fundamental point, because what we need to know is whether people coming before these committees are actually telling us the truth.
I can promise you I didn't tell an untruth.
Okay. Thank you, Chair.
Assembly Member Hamdash.
Great, thank you. So you've described this Palantir contract as a broader suite of looking at technology to achieve savings. Are there other contracts on the table, and are you confident that they're following the due process?
I mean, Assembly Member Hamitash, I think it's important to understand that we take decisions all the time on the Met's use of technology. Through our meeting that we call IAM, we regularly talk about those decisions over the threshold, and often they are technology decisions, given that's the way the world is going. For example, we had a question that we were going to discuss today. I don't think we'll have time now on the DXC contract, which is a database program. So yes, we often talk through technology and the use of technology, and yeah.
Just a follow-up question from me. So you talked about technology being a way to drive savings and to help address some of that budget hole. But I'm very conscious of the example with Palantir and the Homes for Ukraine scheme, where initially the software came in as free, and then eventually it proved that the software was not a cost saving at all, had locked them into a system that was poorer than an in-house solution and proved to be a waste of money. I'd be really keen to understand how awake are you to the idea of technology being a cost saver, and how do you make sure that we're adequately skilled up to make sure that we are not getting stuck into using a certain provider, that we have product management skills in the Met and in MOPAC?
Yeah, that's something that we're definitely conscious of. It's something that we've questioned the Metropolitan Police about, how in contracts they can be, a equipped client, to make sure that they're pushing for value in the contract. It's really important, especially in constrained times, that they're able to do that. We also recognise that the use of technology can be very positive, but it doesn't always enable cash savings in the way that is really needed in constrained times, and that's something that we also question on. It's really important, obviously. So yes, we're working through those issues and making sure in our role that we're pushing the oversight of that.
Okay, thanks. Assemblymember Roberts on a new topic.
Sorry, Chair. The MPS has previously addressed it. This is for Adrian, by the way. MPS has previously assessed its resource need as 38,000 officers and 19,000 staff. Does this target remain appropriate?
Yeah, so that remains our kind of ambition. It's clearly we need to live within our fiscal means from spending review to spending review. But in the last spending review, we set out how we build towards those numbers if funding was available in the future. And if you look at other capital cities and so on, you can see that our numbers compare poorly in that respect. So that remains our ambition size of the Met, but that's not based on the resource envelope that we have available to us immediately.
Okay, thank you. One supplementary to the Deputy Mayor, if I may. In December, you told the committee that the Mayor's manifesto commitment on additional officers was, quote, on track. Can you confirm how many officers we've lost since the election, and would you say that we are still on track?
So is this in relation to the ambition of having 1,300 officers?
I mean, we got the ambition, but we got the reality as well. So, and we also had the Mayor's ambition for 1,300 brand new officers, which apparently aren't brand new officers. They're retreads from existing officers. But are we still on track, do you think? We've got the ambition, we know where we're going, but is there enough juice in the tank?
Yep, so we continue to work with government through their neighbourhood government grant, neighbourhood policing grant, to make sure that we are delivering on neighbourhood officers. I think at last count we've seen an additional 500 officers last year, and I think, was it 450 PCSOs back into neighbourhood teams. And obviously we're waiting at the moment for our allocation for the neighbourhood grant this year, so that we can continue to do that.
Thank you.
Assemblymember Hall.
Thank you. We were talking about retreads and putting people in different teams. So if I could talk to you about the Met rotation scheme. You're familiar with that? Yes, of course. Good. I've been contacted by numerous police officers. If you look at firearms officers, some of them are saying that some of them are being rotated to cover neighbourhood policing. Can you confirm that that is correct?
I mean, we know that the rotation scheme, moreover, is meant to look at officers who've been in specialist roles for over 10 years, and look at
that's correct.
Rotating them into frontline roles. I think I know we've discussed this at committee previously. I think I've had definitely officers say to me that they welcome it. They welcome being able to go back into front lines and use their expertise to improve neighbourhood policing. I also think it's really important that we recognise that the neighbourhood policing teams are also using a combination of neighbourhood officers and specialist teams in certain high-volume crime areas to unlock that and improve outcomes in that. So, yes, they have been rotations throughout, and I think, you know, that's been the Commissioner's belief that it's really important as we continue to prioritise neighbourhood crimes, the thing that, you know, real issues that we've got some real traction on through things like phone thefts. There being 10,000 more arrests last year on phone thefts.
We get the gist of what you're saying, but
crime.
You'll know because you've obviously got a copy of all the questions there because you've referred to them about 3 times now, which I've at least, yeah. So if we just go back, if we can concentrate on the firearms officers, how much does it cost to train a firearms officer?
Adrian, I don't know, do you have the specifics of that?
I don't have that figure to hand, I'm afraid.
Apparently around £35,000, which is quite a lot of money. So you've got specialists who'll pick up a gun, which lots of officers won't, who'll go through a very expensive, taxpayer-funded, obviously, training scheme. You've got absolute experts in firearms, and you want to put them on the front line as in neighbourhood teams. Make that make sense for me.
The Commissioner has stated that given the concerns around the culture within the Metropolitan Police, he's taken the operational decision to make sure that there aren't, I believe he calls it kind of cliques or negative cultures that develop over time because there's no continual put through. If we think about the things that we learned through the KC review, particularly on firearms, it is really important, and it's something that the LPB have worked to understand more of in relation to the KC review, that areas like firearms have a positive culture, and some of that the Commissioner believes is having that food for it. As I've
but if you take half a dozen of them, if you take half a dozen firearms officers, put them on the front, whether they want to go or not, the cost implications of retraining and having new firearms officers are substantial. Now, I feel sorry for the Commissioner because he's been told to sort out culture, quite right. So we've got a company like Palantir who's come in, and my God, the stuff that can do on getting information in. I've seen some of the results. I'm surprised you haven't, but I have. It looks quite incredible. So he's already got his hands tied behind his back. I get that. But there is no sense in my head and in many of these firearms officers, who, by the way, do not want to go onto frontline policing, having invested so many of their years in firearms. How can that make sense when it costs so much to train them?
My understanding from the Commissioner's point of view of why he's taken that decision is because not only does he not want a stagnant workforce that builds negative cultures by staying in the same way, but there's also a belief, which I've heard directly from specialists in counter-terrorism and other teams, that there's a real willingness for them to use their expertise to serve Londoners, which I think is a really positive thing.
So tell me then, if they really do not want to move, can you tell me that you'll have a word with the Commissioner and say, well, if some of these firearms officers want to stay as firearms officers, and I believe that we have a real difficulty in recruiting these firearm officers, especially after the Chris Carver case, which I'm not surprised that they don't want to do at all. So given that we have difficulties recruiting them, given that they cost a fortune to train, we all understand that, and they don't want to go, many of them do not want to go onto the front line, will you have a word with the Commissioner to see if that can be stopped? Because it's blooming ridiculous.
As I've previously said, we've had active conversations about the culture in the firearm, how to improve that, how to diversify that. That is something that, on the back of the KC report, is really important that we look at and improve the firearm.
Really
I've already had conversations in relation to that.
It's really important.
It would be very inappropriate for me to say to the Commissioner of the Metropolitan Police
it's
where
really
to place
important,
officers.
Deputy Mayor, that we have firearms officers and it's getting more and more important. And I would think firearms officers with years of experience are even more important. And yet you want to put them on the neighbourhood teams. And they must cost a lot more. So if somebody's looking after the budget of a borough or a BCU, and you're looking to put neighbourhood firearms officers onto the neighbourhood teams, they're going to cost a great deal more, aren't they?
I think, as I've previously said, the where officers are placed is a fully operational decision that the Commissioner needs to take based on the expertise that he has and the direction that he wants to take. Whilst I have definitely pushed on the culture
Police
of the
officers.
firearms unit and making sure that that's positive and there's a positive pipeline of recruitment for both women and people from different
Deputy Mayor, police
minorities.
officers are absolutely infuriated by this, and you cannot blame them. If you spend your career getting a speciality, getting to know how to do something as important to us all as that,
Can I just say,
surely
I think this is really negating the great work that neighbourhood officers do.
No, it's
and how
not.
important that is.
It
and how
is.
it's really important for
But they
things
don't
that
hold
we
guns,
care.
do they? They don't have to deal. I'm sure you've been out with the firearms officers. I certainly have. And lots of people would not want to do it. It is terrifying. And they are very, very exceptionally brave. And it's not decrying neighbourhood teams. I fully
think that there's
appreciate what they
neighbourhood
do.
teams. I fully recognise how brave firearms officers are. Yes, I have met loads and I'm very impressed by their skills. They've been out on raids with them. I
they're
fully
not very
understand that. I think they
impressed.
have expertise that it's great that they're able to share with neighbourhood officers, but I would not say that neighbourhood officers aren't brave. I see
I
bravery
didn't say that.
in neighbourhoods
I
all the
didn't say
time.
that for 1 minute. I'm saying, look at the quality of these firearms officers who have been trained to do a job. To actually put them into a completely different job is utterly ridiculous. No wonder everybody is saying the Met is in a state at the moment, because this does not make sense. I'll leave it at there, Chair, because we haven't got the time.
Sticking with neighbourhood policing, Assemblymember Small Edwards.
Thank you, Chair, and good afternoon, panel. My question is directed at Adrian and Amano, but Deputy Mayor, if you do have anything to add, please, of course, do. How does the shift towards neighbourhood policing affect the Met's resources?
So what we've seen is new funding for neighbourhood policing. So that was 45.6 million last financial year, and it's going to 81 million this financial year. That's ring fence for neighbourhood officers. So we grew our numbers, PCSOs and officers within neighbourhoods. Obviously, the organisation falling in size as a whole by about 470 last year with that funding. And we will hold to a higher, it's 399 is our target for this year. And we're well on our way to delivering that already in terms of that growth in neighbourhoods. What we don't know is what that will look like beyond this financial year in terms of further growth. And there is, it's balanced nicely so far in terms of we want to prioritise neighbourhoods and the Commissioner does from an operational perspective, and the growth in money is welcome to help support that and protect the numbers going in there. Clearly, we don't know what the kind of targets will be in future years. So there's I guess there's an inherent risk that the targets don't match the funding going forward for that, and that's something we'll keep talking to the Home Office going forwards. But it has allowed us to increase numbers within those neighbourhood roles over this financial year and the previous one.
Yeah, and being a councillor and now an Assembly member, that's something I've heard loud and clear is the need for more neighbourhood officers, and I think that would be very welcome from a lot of Londoners. So is it 45 million to 81 million in this year's budget? Is that correct?
Yeah, 81 million in this budget, which is ring fence for neighbourhood funding. We haven't had the details of the grant through yet, but we have heard that we're hopeful that the Home Office has reflected on the feedback from previous years, which is quite challenging to claim the grant, although ultimately we were able to claim that in full.
And sorry, just the headline officer change as well in this year in neighbourhoods is?
So we need to increase the numbers from the baseline by another 399 FTE, and that's the baseline from when the programme started 2 years ago. So it's 470 of growth last year and 399 this year, which is reflected within our plans.
Okay, and you think that will be achieved?
Yeah.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks. Assembly Member Clark.
Yeah, thank you. Can I come back to you, Kaya? The government has committed to put an additional 13,000 police officers, police community support officers and special constables into neighbourhood policing, and we all know how important that is. How many would you expect to see in London of that allocation?
We're working towards our target of 1,300.
So that wouldn't give us any additional officers in addition to the 1,300 promised by the police, promised by the mayor.
No, those are. I mean, overall, we're stabilising the workforce, but in terms of neighbourhood officers, those are the areas we're pushing for.
Okay, and just generally speaking, I mean, I think when we look at London's crime stats and we look at community policing, we can already see an increase in the number of neighbourhood officers. And I know that my own, where I'm a councillor, I know that my own police we've gone from having 3 between an even larger ward than I serve now, to now having 4 plus an assistant sergeant as well. So it really has already expanded.
Yeah, exactly. And obviously there's been the neighbourhood uplift that was already there, and we're hoping to go further with that. I would add as well that really being able to work with government on things like the summer initiative and the winter nights initiative has enabled us to use data to really focus on where those uplifts should be, whether they be in town centres, the doubling of the Westminster team as well, and the impact that has had on performance in terms of crime outcomes being seen itself. I know I've visited several places in your constituency now, and from Pedro, the PCSO, who sticks in my heart because of how stressed he out was previously, not having the ward team support, to how happy he is now to have that additional support to those areas that sadly over the last year we've had to see even more resource and support. It's a tribute to the Met that they've been able to achieve on those numbers.
I think that's right, and I think PC Pedro, I know he'll enjoy listening to this, but from being in Colindale before we had Clearhold build there, he was so frustrated as a local PCSO, and then to now have the support of the Met to be working so close with Barnett Homes. It's remarkable that the difference that local community policing makes, especially when it engages so well with the community, and the community has that trust and confidence built back into police. And so thank you for that and your many visits. I'll hand back to the chair.
Thanks. We're quite short on time now for this panel, but I've got a couple of quick final questions. Assemblymember Hall.
Yeah, I'll be quick. Going back to what Assemblymember Clark said about the additional 13,000 police officers by the government. By the way, in the small print, it says that the growth in the NHP includes both new recruits and officers who have been redeployed from another function, which, of course, is what you're doing. When the Mayor promised extra police, are they extra or are they just redeployed? Just a quick answer, please, Deputy Mayor.
We've released 560 through civilianisation. I think that's really important, that officers are moved from back office roles into front neighbourhood
So
roles.
they are redeployed? Yeah.
561
okay.
of them, yeah.
If you ask for a pizza, if you order a pizza and ask for extra cheese, do you assume they're going to bung some off the side and put it in the middle and call that extra? Or would you expect extra cheese on the whole pizza?
Sorry.
That's the word extra. I'm trying to see if you understand the word extra. We understood there to be extra police officers, not redeployed officers. I'm trying to get it so that I can see if you understand extra.
I very much understand the word extra. I'm not sure where pizzas come in. It's been a razor.
It's just a demonstration. If you ask for extra, it means more of the same. So that's why I brought a pizza in, because I hoped you'd understand the point.
I can, yep. I don't know why you, anyway. I think what's really important is that we've had to have a situation where fully trained police officers have been in back office roles.
No.
And this additional money has enabled them to do the job that they were trained for, and we've been able to have police staff, valued police staff, back into roles that they can do,
Redeployed.
which has unlocked our ability to put more officers into
So they're not
neighbourhoods.
extra at all, and that's the point. And as I say, you look at the small print on what the government's saying they'll provide, and actually that means redeployment as well, which is disingenuous to say the least. I'll leave it there because we're short of time.
Member Roberts, did you still have a question? No, in that case, Assemblymember Harani.
Thank you, Chair. Just alluding to some of the events that we have had in North West London across Barnet and Brent. So at last Mayor's Question Time, the Mayor did say that himself and the Commissioner had made a special representation to government regarding neighbourhood policing in North West London, BCU, given the strain on resources at the moment, and particularly around some of the abstractions around those local officers being pulled in to rightfully support communities that are being targeted at the moment. So can you give us an update on that representation and when we can expect a response, but also more details of what was in that representation?
So that was the proposals that we put alongside the Metropolitan Police into government around the additional resources of officers needed in North West London. I believe it's 33 million over 3 years. So circa 100 million for a 3-year period to form a community police operation that is the combination of both local policing that have the knowledge, but also linking that into specialist expertise that have led already to a significant amount of arrests that has happened, sadly, on the back of some horrific attacks in Golders Green and other places. So we put that proposal to government. Government has already, I believe, allocated £500,000 to Brent Council to do some of that work around bringing community cohesion together, which is also really important. We are continuing to talk to government. We know that it's a favourable proposal, and we're just waiting to hear the outcome.
And so is the thrust of the proposal to have more dedicated resource to tackling the issues that are around, targeting of Jewish communities, but also Iranian communities that have also been targeted as well, and to allow for neighbourhood police officers to spend more time in their neighbourhoods as a result and not be abstracted into any central operations?
Yeah, the idea is that it's a community support policing service, an additional policing service. We really recognise that that part of London has an interesting combination of a significant Jewish community, but also a lot of the Iranian diaspora community too, and that there has been sadly some really sad, awful attacks that have affected both communities, and this proposal is for us to be able to have a combination of local officers, the officers there who have been doing a brilliant job. I'm sure you've heard the same in Brent, how reassured the communities have been to have this visible policing in the area, but also to use in combination, some of the specialist teams as well.
Thank you very much. Thank you, everyone. That brings an end to our first questions to our first panel. Thank you very much, everyone. You're free to leave. We will now have a short adjournment while we swap over for our second panel. So we'll resume, let's say, just before 4 p.m. Hello and welcome back to the second panel for this afternoon's Budget and Performance Committee, where we're looking at Metropolitan Police Service funding and officer numbers. And I'd like to welcome our second panel of guests. We have Blair Gibbs, who's the Director of Police Foundation. We have Ian Wiggett, Associate Director of World Policing Advisory, and Professor Tom Kirchmeier, the Director of Policing and Crime Research at the London School of Economics. Welcome all three. Let me kick off with a sort of broad question, really. Partly whether you have any initial reflections on what you heard from the previous panel, but I suppose particularly focusing on this question of officer numbers and PCSO numbers. Obviously, they've fallen over the last 3 years. What, in your view, is that trend likely to continue, and what are likely to be the impacts of that? So, who would like to go first? Blair, I guess you heard most of the previous panel.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Thank you for the invitation. I did hear most of the previous session. I think what stood out to me was the overall challenge for MOPAC and the Met in the current fiscal climate, which is a constant, clearly. I reflect back on, in a previous life myself, worked in MOPAC, would have been up until about 2015. A very different political climate, but a very different budget settlement too, and a big reduction in central government funding, which the Mayor at the time did not compensate for with increases in precept, but took some other more difficult decisions which were very controversial at the time, and released savings and made other changes in the Met's operating model to deliver the necessary in-year savings to keep officer numbers high. And as I think one of the previous guests mentioned, that was achieved despite that broad reduction in central government funding. But I think overall, and this isn't just the case in London, that policing in the country as a whole is insufficiently funded for the demands that are now placed upon it. There are some different ways of looking at this. So it's not just a numbers game, of course. It's not just about the inputs. It's about the workload and the demand on the police. And if you look at some forthcoming analysis by Professor Larry Sherman, who now runs the Cambridge Centre for Evidence-Based Policing, but was previously employed by the Met Police, he has this thing called the crime harm index, which is perhaps familiar to some of you, but it's a way of, if you like, measuring the mix of the crime demand that the police are encountering. So obviously not all crimes are equal, and some of the crime mix is much more intensive to investigate and to detect and to successfully prosecute. And what that analysis shows is that over a period of 10 years between 2016 to now, the crime harm mix in London has increased by about 74%. And it's a new way of looking at the demands placed on the police. So rather than looking just at volume crime and counting individual crimes, you're trying to reflect the actual workload that is on the police in London. And we know that in certain areas like violence against women and girls, actual reports of rape up significantly. But it's the knock-on effect of that crime mix becoming much more serious and much more complex that I think is a real challenge for the Met. And in that context, I think it's very hard to see a way of sustaining officer numbers unless you're prepared to make other bigger changes. There are, of course, two things still to decide, which is in future whether or not the current mayor or a future mayor decides to continue to increase the precept. There's also the decision of the Treasury and the Home Office about general police funding over the longer term. As I've said, I think generally speaking, we as a country spend too little on the police. If you compare us, for example, to comparable common law countries like Australia or New Zealand or Canada, we spend less as a percentage of GDP than those countries do. And there's a bigger debate obviously happening around defence and security generally, where it seems like the public are moving into a position of supporting more of our public spending going towards defence and security. So I would argue that that has to include policing now in the current context, and given that increase in complex and high harm crime that they have to deal with.
Thanks very much. Ian.
Yeah, I think the biggest challenge really is that the budgets are not clear from next year onwards. And coming back to the point about are these extra officers going into neighbourhoods, the money is being steered, so the money is taken out of the general pot of policing and being given back to forces on condition that it's spent on extra neighbourhood officers, but the pot overall is gradually shrinking. So are there extra officers? Well, actually, no. It depends how you ask the question. They might be, the government is trying to steer forces to put more into neighbourhoods, whether they're PCSOs, special constables, or police officers. That doesn't matter. They all count, I believe, towards the 13,000 total nationally. The Met will have its allocation of that, but that comes out of the general fund for policing, so the Met will correspondingly get a slightly smaller allocation as a result of the government trying to steer this into neighbourhood policing. That money is not guaranteed beyond this year, so there's no clarity whether this is going to be funded. The government's also said that they're expecting forces to absorb things like the inflation increases and the pay increases. So that represents a significant hit on the overall policing budget. So the net, and again, without that certainty beyond that, it's very difficult for the country, for forces in the country now to start to plan ahead and to work out how many officers can I afford, how many PCSOs or police staff can I afford, even next year is a question. The net result, I think, is that there'll be more pressure for council tax increases. The other thing that's emerging on the horizon is the police reform white paper and what the impact of that might be. So not only do forces have to plan for next year very quickly, they'll have to plan for a situation where I'm not quite sure what my force, and that applies to the Metropolitan Police as well, what exactly we're going to be managing here. So it's that huge uncertainty, I think, but the net picture is likely to be not hugely positive in terms of police funding.
Thanks. Tom, what are your general reflections on where things stand?
I'm coming a bit from the outside because I'm an economist by training, and obviously I'm an academic. So we in economics see the world in a very simple world. You know, it's either supply and demand, and costs and benefits is kind of always essentially on these two dimensions. And I think where Blair was spot on is like it's undoubtedly that the benefits of policing are higher than the costs we have at the moment. So which should all give us, and this is kind of, I think, universally true around the world, we don't pay as much for policing as we should. Now, obviously, the budget is limited, and we have a productivity problem in the country and in Western Europe, to that matter. And so we have to live with what we have. And so we did some work actually before the pandemic with Greater Manchester Police after Ian had left. Nothing to do with that, actually. It's just he retired. And we came up with a concept which I call balanced policing, where we actually related time spent in a particular area by people to how much crime there was, ranked not along the Cambridge Harm Index, but similar index or rated. And what you see is actually there's this essential over-policing into these hotspots and under-policing into the mid-tier level. And I think this is kind of something we observe throughout the country, that officers like to go where the action is, and they don't like to go where the mid-tier is. And I think we will come a very long way if we actually become more clever in how we deploy people. So we don't necessarily need more people, we just need to have them at the right time, right place. And that's something actually we're starting to work on with GMP.
Thanks very much. So we've got a series of sort of drilling down to different elements of that, starting with Assembly Member Small Edwards.
Thank you, Chair. We've seen the proportion of Met funding from City Hall increase from about 18% to around 25% in the last decade. What do you think would be a optimal balance between funding from City Hall and funding from national government when it comes to the Met's funding? Start with Blair.
I think ultimately it's a political decision, but I think if you look across the country, and I know it varies depending on the gearing of local taxation and the funding formula, forces vary in their contribution from something like about that 25, 28%, right up until, you know, I think it's still the case that Surrey has something like 48%, 50% of their total funding envelope comes from local rather than national. Is there a right number? I'm not sure. And does it make for a different kind of police service? I'm not sure either. I think what's interesting at the moment, and this goes to, for example, what the mayor here himself could choose to do, or a future mayor could choose to do, is what's happened in Wales. So there you have, of course, 4 police and crime commissioners, so a very similar governance model, funding model, effectively, as in England, where the majority of the funding for the local forces in Wales comes from the Home Office. But the Welsh Government decided, for its own political reasons, to campaign on and run on a campaign to invest even more on top by effectively funding directly ring-fenced police community support officers. And it's interesting that I think in London that's never been the case. The Mayor's precept has always been a contribution to the overall funding for the Met. And I don't know that any mayor has ever had the conversation with the Commissioner about what would our own ring fence look like. If we wanted to, for example, really maintain that visible, uniformed front line of neighbourhood teams, and maybe this was the case in Ken Livingstone's day, I don't know, but there is a possibility there that you could just fund directly and ring fence. But then it's a question of whether or not you'd have agreement across the board for that. And as you've rightly said, the current mayor has already increased the precept quite significantly. And it's not the most efficient way of raising money.
Just before I go to your other colleagues on the panel, I mean, there is some sense in that, given that the Met has a lot of national responsibilities. If the Mayor of London is increasing the funding, it does make sense the Mayor of London might want it to be focused squarely on London policing rather than going into a bigger pot.
Yes, and to Ian's very good point about police reform, if you like, the total envelope of the Met itself will potentially, without any decision-making from this place, it will reduce anyway, because certain national functions might end up floating off into the new National Police Service. So in that case, the funding, if you like, for London becomes smaller, and then the Mayor's share of that could potentially increase.
Thank you very much, Ian.
Yeah, in Scotland, there is no police precept. It's funded entirely from the Scottish Government. And if you go back 30 years or so in England and Wales, that was the situation here, where policing was funded entirely from central government, and you didn't have the capability of raising funds locally to supplement the actual funding that came from central government. And over time, over those 30 years, what we've seen is that central government has progressively cut the amount of money that it puts into policing and progressively expected local communities to pick up the difference. Now, it's great that a local community can put their hands up and say, I'm happy to pay extra to get extra policing in my area. But obviously some communities aren't able to afford as much as others. And so you end up with an imbalance of policing, rather like you get in parts of the United States, I think, that sort of model, where wealthy, affluent communities can afford extra policing, poorer, struggling communities can't afford policing and end up in a downward spiral. And I suppose it comes down to your personal views on whether policing should be a national function that's allocated nationally according to the need, or whether it's a local function that you should have some influence. The balance, I think, is somewhere in between. But what we've got at the moment is a completely random arrangement, going back over history of who's able to afford, what's happened to local government, local decisions, as you say, by previous regimes that have said we're not increasing the tax, but we'll find savings. And that's left us, you've ended up then behind, and it's very difficult then to catch up on where others have got to by increasing local taxation.
Thank you very much. And just on the Scotland point, because I know police in Scotland underwent the reorganisation, which saw it become Police Scotland and saw those local functions become under Police Scotland. So even under the previous system prior to that unified model, there still wasn't the precept element within Scottish policing.
Yeah, that's correct. Yeah.
Thank you. Tom.
So I just want to make a general remark or two. One is, I think around the world, most police services are funded centrally for exactly the point Ian mentioned, that, those that actually are most in need of policing have least money to pay for it, which is also what we observe, I think, across England. The other one is, everything probably changes now with the funding formula. If we have police reorganization, and it's probably for this committee to stand up and get its fair share, I would have thought, because there's a huge political fight ahead, which hasn't really been picked up yet.
Thank you all very much. It was really interesting. Back to you, Chair.
Thank you. Assembly Member Georgiou.
Just very briefly, before I get onto my question written here, and I don't know who to, because you've all fallen into what I view as a cardinal sin whenever people say, the GLA, the mayor pays for this, Scottish government pays for this, national government pays for this. No, the taxpayers pay for all of this stuff. And I don't think that's ever communicated enough. So just on that point, do you think in terms of when we talk about local, regional and national funding, that not enough communication has gone out from politicians primarily that say, if you want X, you have to pay for it? Do you not think that politicians perhaps don't do that enough? Because you always have the wording, and you three are speaking in what is correct. We get taxation, it goes out to the regions and the areas and the London boroughs. But do you not think politicians have a role to say, look, if you as Londoners want this, because reality, who really knows what the mayor's precept is? Let's be honest about that. Whenever we use the word precept, most people do not understand what that means. They understand council tax and understand the mayor takes a bit of that. But do you think we do enough explaining as to these are the trade-offs? You've got to pay for it to get it.
I mean, all in favour of more sort of education and public kind of transparency about how money is spent, and also what things cost. It's not enough just to explain it. I think I'm suggesting that there's a bigger argument that politicians locally and nationally need to have, which is how much as a society do we think we need to spend on safety and security. Because yes, some of the costs of policing have gone up, but the demands on the policing have far exceeded those. And those demands are at the more complex and high harm end of offending, and they're very hard to set aside and to say we won't respond to. But there are choices being made, therefore, internally, which are not communicated and explained about what isn't done instead. And I think just, for example, with this not being just a London issue, police forces have for years had to make a decision about deployment of the uniformed officers they have, and to look at visibility numbers across the country. As these are the measures from the crime survey for England and Wales. They show public confidence dropping, they show visibility dropping. This is true in Scotland, by the way, not just in England and Wales. But that's a consequence of decisions taken locally because funding was inadequate.
Okay.
Funding was not adequate to support enough of the visible presence the public wanted.
Okay.
And that wasn't ever explained to people, I don't think.
I mean, both of you are welcome to answer, but do you feel like Blair's covered it? Yeah.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think it's the same for. You could look at social care costs falling on local authorities. Your council tax goes up. More and more of that is taken up by matters that were previously dealt with by central government. Central government says we've got more money, we're spending more money, but all the public experience is services getting worse, police officers being less visible, but I'm paying more, so where's my money going? And it's that sort of sensible conversation that I think people would love, we'd love to have. I'm not sure it's going to fix the the challenges, though, because we're talking about difficult choices being made about where does that limited money get spent and in which is the best way of doing it.
And Tom, you had a hand up very briefly on this point.
No, I have no particular opinion on this.
Okay. All right, good. Right, in that case, so to all three of you, and once again, if one of you covers it, the other two don't feel the need to jump in unless there's something more you want to add. So the recent policing white paper sets out a number of proposed changes to how policing is structured, funded and delivered nationally. What are the implications of those changes for the MPS? So Ivor or Blair, I assume one of you may want to pick this up first.
I think the biggest change, bearing in mind governance isn't changing, the biggest immediate change will be the National Police Service creation. Because obviously the Met still runs a number of national functions, still has some significant contributions into national responsibilities, and the vision in due course is that those will transfer to a new body outside the Met. Now, I was checking, I think there's 3,600 or something like that in national functions in the Met at the moment. So that's a sizable portion of the headcount. We don't know exactly how many of those will go into the new body and when they will go. And there will probably be other functions like, for example, if for example, the regional crime units are transferring into a national body, then you would expect those equivalent bodies, such as the specialist organised crime groups in London, to be moved across as well. So you could see some units being taken out of the Met that have been integral and long-standing and very visible, like the flying squad, for example, that could potentially be moved into a different body. So I think and those sorts of things are then going to start influencing things like personnel development, training, succession planning, what skill base is left within communities. So the traditional development patterns and growth will change, I think, with that. The governance structure is obviously not changing, so to some extent the Met is isolated from some of those changes, but there will invariably be an impact.
Thank you. Blair.
Yeah, I'd just add to that to say that obviously when you had the Met representative here, the ambition that they commit to, which is still of a force of 38,000 and 19,000 staff, that's predicated on no change to national functions. So, as Ian said, if those changes do happen, which of course require legislation, then that would reduce, basically on the current numbers by say 3,000 or 4,000. But the police reform plans are just a white paper at this point. So the legislation would have to come forward in this session. So let's assume on the best case scenario it's September to legislate for the National Police Service. I would think it probably wouldn't be stood up until 28. So it won't really impact on your deliberations in terms of this mayoral term, but it would potentially have an impact on the next mayor.
Right, and just one final question, Ian and Blair. Look, obviously you've both touched on the white paper and the NPS element. To me, and once again, I've no particular views on this either way. It just sounds like more bureaucracy and a waste of money, taxpayer money. But in terms of, we're already heard from both of you that it could lead to essentially reductions in frontline police officers or back office as well as frontline that the Met would normally have access to. But then what, in addition, I know we've heard some bit about training, but in reality, a lot of money will be spent on this, and what will the realistic impact be in terms of frontline policing and cutting crime?
It's the white paper's headed from local to national. And for me, that's a shift from local control to national control and an emphasis of the national.
No, I get that, but is that a good or a bad thing? Yeah. Is that a good or a bad thing?
It's good if you're interested in things like digital crime, cyber crime, the growth of fraud, the ability of the country, the UK as a whole, to stand up a policing response and deal with the most serious threats that are coming in. If you're a local resident of a local area, the net result on that side is that I think that there will be less money, there will be more bureaucracy potentially, there'll be more focus on what's happening somewhere in the national sphere, international sphere, less focus on the local and less money for the local. The way the government aims to balance that is through the the neighbourhood policing guarantee. Is that sufficient? Then I think there's a question over that. But their hope, I think, is to separate the separate tiers so that you can have your cake and eat it. You can put your you can preserve and, in fact, expand the resources in very local policing. You can grow the national capability and have all these fancy new facilities that we probably lack somewhere between us. We might be able to put something together, but even the Met will struggle to put together some of these highly specialist capabilities. The sandwich in the middle, that middle tier perhaps, is the force, the local response, your local CID teams, your crime investigation, your ability to deal with things that are happening that are not neighbourhood, not national, but somewhere in between. The general policing service, in fact, that most of the public will rely on, and that's the bit I think will suffer. Tom?
I'm making a statement which you probably don't like now, which is...
It's all right, I do it all the time.
Which is, I think we're focusing far too much on officer numbers, and we focus far too little how we organize them. And, there's huge, in my private opinion, there's huge potential to improve the productivity of police officers if we employ them better, in better ways, at right time, right place. And deployment tactics are rather simplistic at the moment across, actually, global policing, but including the Met. So I think we just have to get smarter, and the data we have and the information we have doesn't get used in everyday policing. So, let's think about how we organize this better, especially, and the police reform, I think, is a great opportunity because it gives us a break to rethink how we do things. And I just want to add, I wrote a paper with Magdalena Dominguez on restructuring the Met. It went from the borough commands to the 12 PCUs. And, I paraphrase a little bit, but at the end of the day, it didn't make much of a difference. So we did all this hoo-ha for essentially nothing.
Agree.
And in fact, actually, in certain areas, the service went down. It's in the public domain, so you can all read it. So we need to be a little bit careful to refocus on the right topic, which is how can we actually make policing more productive, and not just how do we have enough numbers.
Well done on getting your plug in there. And we've had sandwiches and pizzas. I'm looking forward to what comes next. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thanks. In fact, we're coming on to some questions specifically on that, so stand by. Assembly Member Roberts.
Thank you. Good afternoon. So what does an effective workforce model for a large urban police force look like in terms of the balance between warranted officers, PCSOs and civilian staff?
Tom will come in with some expertise, I'm sure, but this was a hot topic about 20 years ago. And I think the Surrey model was proposed. That was, if people can remember that one, and they were aiming really for about a 50-50 split. And Mark Rowley would have been very aware of that, with the aim that perhaps like a military-type model, where you only need a very small fighting front end with full warranted powers. And anything that doesn't need warranted powers can be dealt with by specialists, support staff, and you come up with systems that take away the workload from the front end. That was pushed for some time. I think the drawback for that is you end up... There are positives. It can be cheaper. You can get more police officers out there and free up their time. The drawback is you end up with quite convoluted systems, typically with lots of handovers, where you're passing jobs from individual to individual with different skills. It becomes more complex. The front end starts to lose skills around investigating crimes. They turn up They apply a sticking plaster and go because it's not their job to do all this other stuff. And you end up then with a workforce that starts to lose connection as well with local communities. So we go round in circles, and part of that was having a neighbourhood structure and trying to put more officers and mixed teams, mixed economy teams into a place and to own that place. And for me personally, I think that was where I think you got the best overall benefit, because you were working as a team, you owned a territory, you had a mix of individuals and skills, you could put together most of the things that you needed and deal with most of the jobs in that area. We now seem to be going back into specialisms again, where domestic abuse, sexual offences, shoplifting, we end up with squads, squad after squad after squad, and that then starts to, again, create these things of individual silos and difficulty of different bits working together. So I think it's less, and this is where perhaps Tom has done lots of work on looking at reorganisations and restructuring, is, for me, I think the best model is where you've got a closer team that's manageable with responsibility for space, for that place, and they have got the right skills and mix of that for that territory. And that will be a mix of officers, support staff as well. So it's not necessarily the ideal mix, but what is the right mix for that piece of territory, which might be different from somewhere else.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Tom.
So I got the lead here. Yeah. So
time to think.
I think I want to compliment Ian a little bit with another dimension. You know, the issue is crime has changed in a certain respect. You know, fraud is now global. It comes from anywhere in the world. Cyber crime, cyber attacks. We work a little bit on that. A local neighborhood police officer will have absolutely no impact on it. Mm-hmm. And that wasn't an issue 20 years ago. So I think what we need to do is actually separate this a little bit into kind of specialized officers who can deal with cyber crime and fraud and all these issues, which, in my opinion, will only get more, not less. In particular, as it's now much easier to hack things with all these AI models. And on the other hand, you need to show a strong local presence. But as I said, how you actually then position your people, we can do much more intelligent than, you know, just having an officer in every ward, for example. You know, it needs to be, supply and demand needs to balance. You know, how much crime you have in a particular area at a particular time needs to balance with how we deploy the officers. And so I think we need to separate this, and also a career structure for a normal police officer is inadequate for a specialist officer who does cybercrime. Because at the moment they're expected to go back out on the beat because this is how they make their career. It's a complete waste of money for the society, because they're much better used in their specialist function where they can grow and so on. So we need to be more intelligent. And then the third is the underbelly, which is kind of, I think we don't have enough back office stuff. We need to direct our people. And we've taken away the intelligence by focusing too much on frontline. So, and I was in the Met, and I don't tell you where it was because it's irrelevant, where you had whatever, 50 officers doing Excel spreadsheets. And I can do this with my students, like PhD students, you know, equally good. So here we waste a lot of resources just by investing in the wrong thing.
Yeah, I seem to recall there was a time when the government offered funding for more officers, and they said, well, great, let's get some back office teams to free up the officers, and the government didn't think that was sexy enough. Yes. They want to be seen to be investing in police persons, not in pen pushers, which doesn't seem to me to be the correct way forward either.
I think one thing I'd add is this idea of the front line. So if you go back even 20 or 30 years, the policing family was a much bigger collection of people, including not just many more PCSOs, but specials. And there's been an enormous collapse, actually, in the number of people volunteering as special constables. All sorts of reasons, I think, for that, and not just a problem in London. But there seems to be no ambition from politicians or police chief officers to grow the special constabulary again. I don't understand it. And also those groups feeding into policing at the lowest end. So in terms of future recruits and building that bond between the police and the public, cadet units across the country are hand to mouth. Some of them in London are fantastic, and some of them have waiting lists, and some boroughs don't have seemingly any at all. So again, where's the investment in the broader policing family, I think, because it's always going to be a mixed economy, and you'll always have an argument for saying that there should be some roles that are better done by civilians. But I do think there's the other dimension, which Tom sort of hinted at, which is that in 10 or 20 years' time, at the rate that technology is advancing and AI is marching forward, it's the civilian staff roles that are most exposed to automation and robotics and these sorts of things. It's not your frontline police officers. The public will always demand and expect to have that human sort of frontline delivered by properly trained human officers. So however much we rely on bots and automation in the back office, I think you could imagine a scenario in the future where the share of officers to staff actually goes up. Not because you found a magic money tree for the additional recruits of officers, but actually because you've become less reliant on individual analysts and back office civilian staff to support officers to be as productive as they can be.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks. I've got some good news. So Assembly Member Wilson, who's joining us remotely, has had some microphone difficulty, so he has texted me his question, so I'm going to ask it here. So this is Assemblymember Wilson's question. So looking at the MPS budget, a figure of 1,782.7 million is described as frontline policing, which is about 46.9%. The budget table describes other large allocations, including half as much again for operations and performance. Thinking about the discussion that we've had so far about the pressure on frontline policing and headcount, does that seem like an appropriate split, and how does it compare with forces elsewhere in the country? Who's leaping forward? Ian.
So the Home Office produces, or might be the ONS, they produce annually an assessment of frontline. It's called a frontline policing measure. So there are official definitions of what each role, each force has to fill out what each role does, and it's categorised. And some of those are categorised as frontline, some of them as frontline support, and some as business support, which is in effect the back office. I think most forces are now running around 90 to 92% of their resources in frontline policing. So when those budget figures are talked about as money, 47% or whatever it is, going to frontline policing, I don't know what that definition is, and I don't know what that definition, in this case, in terms of the Metropolitan Police Budget Report, relates to, because apart from the official the frontline policing measure, really it's down to each force as to how they describe or each mayor's office as to how they describe where the money's going. So it might include local policing, it could include firearms officers that are out frontline, it could include call handlers who are taking calls in call centres because they're dealing with the front line. That's included in the definition. So it can be quite a loose definition. And I think it comes back to your point, Mr. Roberts, about what's the right balance. Well, it's a balance that works for you with the available money, and you have to look at the effect of how I play around with those things. But the freedom to change that balance has been restricted for so long.
So just to add to that as well, because this is important for definitions, right? So that's a useful product in terms of understanding roles and where people are in the organisation. It doesn't tell you about what people are doing. And the Home Office does do another thing, which it hasn't done annually for a while, but it released it last month, and I don't know if it has a London breakdown, but it was actually a measure of how police officers spend their time. And this, for us, goes to a very important issue around not just Tom's point about where are you deploying your cops, but also how are we expecting them to work Have we over-regulated the front line to such an extent that they aren't now doing what the public expect them to do, even if they're in a frontline role? So the statistic that stood out to me was that at present estimates, the average amount of time spent by a neighbourhood officer on any type of patrol, foot, bike, car, for a neighbourhood officer, not officers overall, was 18%. This is too low. This is not what this is ultimately not going to deliver any meaningful impact in terms of connection, public presence and visibility for all the government is spending on neighbourhood teams and insisting on this ring fence. If we don't fix the problems that are keeping 4/5 of the time of neighbourhood officers tied up on things that are not patrol, we will not see a step change in the visibility that the public want. So, big debate about what's driving that. A big debate in London, perhaps, about those other things that neighbourhood officers might be doing with their time. And of course, it's not expected to be 100% of their time, but 18% as a measure of what they're actively doing at the moment is too low.
Well, in fact, that leads on nicely to what's going to be my questions. We've spoken quite a lot about headcount as a metric and why that is not always the best metric. So, my question is, what other metrics should we be looking at for assessing the capacity and the outcome, I suppose, as well, of the Met Police? And you've just flagged one up there, Blair, which is what percentage even of the neighbourhood officers are they actually spending doing the thing that people imagine that they're doing. But what are the kinds of, I don't know whether you have anything else up your sleeve along those lines, but what is worth measuring other than just, how many warm bodies they have or how many FTEs, I suppose they would say, they have?
Yeah, so there's things that you need to watch as well, and this is true in all forces. So, what are those things stopping officers from doing those things that they're expected to do? And that might also be things like, the public order demands in London, which are very high, so a very high rate of cancelled rest days, for example. I think the latest data from the Federation in London was there's something like 215,000 cancelled rest days. And these are officers, response officers, neighbourhood officers, sergeants who are being repeatedly having rest days every month on month, cancelled for central London protests. Those sorts of things just by definition impact on the service the public can receive. The other thing more broadly would just be to keep an eye on trust and confidence numbers and what's driving those, because they haven't improved for a long time. And there are things that we know that the police can do to improve those numbers, but it does take some focus, and you have to also have quite good measures of what trust and confidence is at a local level. And I say this having studied closely like what the Mayor's Office do in terms of surveying. The public attitude survey is probably not any longer a sufficient measure of trust and confidence in London. You'd need to look at different methods for capturing trust and confidence numbers at a much more local level. Having quarterly results by borough of a couple of hundred people, which the Commissioner and the Deputy Mayor see 6 months, 5 months after they've been collected, is not a good measure for something so important. So even a little bit of investment on the data and analytics around that, I think, could be worth making in London, because it goes to everything else that the police are trying to do. And if they don't have good data on that trust and confidence metric, I think it'll be much harder to improve overall.
So you've surprised me there. Because we've done this ourselves. You can commission YouGov to do a custom survey for you just in London. We've done this ourselves. And they'll come back to you. They work with you on the questions that you want. They will only ask the questions that they think are sensibly framed questions. And you'll have your results in, a couple of weeks, something like that? Why does it take?
Well, apart from the sort of crisis in the polling industry about whether or not they're reaching people, the traditional methods which are used by both the Public Attitude Survey and the Crime Survey for England and Wales are still based on quite long-form questionnaires that people have to opt in to respond to. Now, of course, the samples are balanced and weighted according to census data, but fundamentally, I've always been concerned that they're not reaching a lot of people. The response rates for these surveys are way under 10% of all the people that they try and get to answer them. And there'll be huge groups in London who are systematically missed out by traditional polling methods like that. And I understand the argument about the golden thread and keeping the methodology consistent, etc., over time. But I think there are now better and frankly cheaper and quicker ways of capturing public sentiment than a traditional long-form questionnaire with people knocking on doors.
Okay. Tom, you were eager to
Yeah, so
comment on
we
this.
have access to this data. So it's representative on London as a whole, but not on borough level. So you need to be careful because the sampling is too low. So this is Blair who's spot on. The other dimension is obviously, how we survey people is fundamentally flawed, given that we only reach people who are staying at home and have a huge bias in that. And so actually our point is on a national level, a bit like Blair, this is done the wrong way and we need to find a new way of surveying people. But I wanted to come up with, I'll tell you something we've done 10 years actually, 10 years ago with Greater Manchester, because officers have this little radio and it gives you a GPS signal every minute, or in London every 5 minutes. So you know exactly where people move around. And so if you actually match it to the actual crime demand, and we know which jobs they attend, how long they spend, and so on, and we know everything about every shop and every train station in the country, you actually start to have a very precise activity-based measure of what officers do. It comes, the Home Office does it by surveying people. We don't survey people, we look at their data and match it to everything. And it gives you a very precise measure about what people really do and how they spend their time.
By people, you mean police officers or
Correct,
PCSOs?
sorry.
Yeah, so just clarifying, you're not
Police
tagging every
officers and
Londoner.
police staff, yeah.
Oh, maybe that would aid in crime fighting.
Yeah, and I think that the challenge with having seen the sort of product that Tom's clever computer and team of people can produce is then how do you respond to that if you're presented with information that shows 18% of your PCSO time is not actually spent doing the things that you want your PCSOs to do. And I suppose that comes down to your management and leader style. You can start measuring people and sanctioning them if they're spending too little time, and then you discover that they're leaving their radios on or moving them, they're doing all sorts of tricks that you really wouldn't want them to do. Or you come back to how do I motivate people? How do I lead people to deliver what I actually want? And I come from the school where I thought that most people are good, they want to do a good job, they want to serve their communities, and there's something that's stopping that. So I need to take that information, they're only spending 18%, and start understanding why is that? What's stopping them? Is it their motivation? Is it paperwork in the back office? Is it some sort of obscure expectation that I remember when I was in Greater Manchester, I went into a neighbourhood team office, I think about 8 o'clock at night, just as they were coming off duty. Well, in fact, they were due off duty at 9 o'clock. Okay, how's it gone? What are you doing? Oh, we're doing our returns. Okay, so what returns are those? Those are the returns that we do to tell our sergeant what we've done during the day. Okay, who asks for that? My sergeant. Do you know what the sergeant does with that information? No, I don't. I went to see the sergeant. What do you do with these returns? So I do these returns so that I know what they're doing. Okay, right. Do you do anything? Well, it's just in case the inspector asks me. And it went up the chain. Net result was a team of PCSOs that were coming in an hour before the end of their shift to tell their line management team what they'd done during their shift. And it took them an hour to get out as well. So you've lost 2 hours out of an 8-hour shift straight away. And it's those sorts of things. Why are we in that situation? I think where we've got, what I've seen with the sort of work that, without plugging Tom already too much, is that there is an awful lot of data out there. We can look at incidents, we can look at patrol times, we can look at where officers are spending their time. We know from computer screens and various other devices that they're carrying around what they are doing with that time. The challenge for the management team is that what I want them doing? And if not, what is it that I can do to make that and take that away? And the leadership challenge is then to, having freed up that time, how do I make sure that is spent doing the stuff I want them to do? And that opportunity is before us now, I think. More opportunity we've ever had to do that. But I'm not sure we're approaching it in that, we're not quite ready to take advantage of it yet.
Yeah.
But just one thing, just to follow up, there's almost a problem for society, not just for policing. And, I haven't seen data also from the commercial sector. Policing actually has really good data. They always complain it's not good. No data set is perfect. The beauty of statistics is it doesn't need to be perfect. It's good enough for our purpose. We just don't use it clever enough.
Well, I was just going to ask, so it sounds like, some of the information you've just spoken about there would be what we might call internal data. So data, the police are obviously not going to release time and motion studies of individual officers to that extent, I would imagine. And then obviously there's public data which we and others are able to look at to try to judge from the outside, is this working well? So on the assumption that the police are probably not going to allow us to tag all their officers and then track them all and put that into an LLM and figure out what's happening, what are the kinds of things that Blair spoke about some of those. What are the kinds of things that we could be looking at to understand, how well are the Met performing and how does that compare with previously?
I can tell you what we use in academia, which is we look at named suspects. The fraction of named suspects across a longer period of time tells you a lot about how well the organization is working. So you have a crime. Not every crime has a named suspect. Actually, only a fraction of them have a named suspect. But there's huge variation how many are named by area, by type, and so on. And if you analyze this, you get a very good figure how well a police area is functioning. I can tell you something else we've done with Thames Valley Police. We just texted people after they had contact with the police how well was the contact from 1 to 6, I think it was, or 1 to 5. And if they responded, tell us a little bit more. It was super interesting because once you control for age, for type of area, it became very clear very quickly which areas worked well and which ones didn't. It just popped out of the regression. We put it in a map and everybody could see it.
Interesting. Thanks
Yeah,
very much.
you definitely, I should say, on Tom's point, you definitely need an additional public-facing measure of satisfaction with the service delivered. And of course, that's capturing people who are actually encountering the police, and maybe not even as a victim of crime, as a witness, for example, or seeking information, whatever it is. But that has to complement your trust and confidence measure. So trust and confidence is how everyone who lives in London perceives the performance of the police, but also their sense of trust in the institution, and then a service level measure as well. And I don't think really we have in London perhaps those measures down at the level that you would want, but that's definitely worth tracking.
Okay, thanks. We are running very short of time. If any of you wish to write to us with more specific thoughts on that, I'd be very happy to hear. Assembly Member Hamdash.
I think you can tell we're finding this theme really quite interesting about kind of productivity and this theme of how we best use the human capital that we have. You've kind of talked about, over-reporting, you've talked about, conduct. But I wonder as well, are there a category of tasks that we're tasking the police that aren't a good use of their time? I mean, one big example for me and a bugbear is, as a local councillor, is the safer neighbourhood meetings. I was always find that actually our officers weren't particularly great at organising a community meeting, whether that's knowing who to reach out to, having the contacts, and these meetings would quite often be cancelled with short notice because the police were abstracted into a different space, and it would just feel an entire waste of time. And actually, I, as a local councillor, could organise a better community meeting for them with a week's notice than them wasting time on it. And I just wonder, is there any thought into, categories of tasks that we need to be taking out of the hands of the police so they can get that number up of 18%?
I think what that is needed is somebody to take the time to look at how that 100% of time of a PCSO is actually being used and how much of that is considered productive. Now, the difficulty is to define what is productive. A community meeting may well be productive, and certainly we'd want community officers spending time with communities to try and understand what's going on and to respond to their issues. Does that translate into I now have to organise a community meeting and turn up. I'm not well prepared for it. I'm not very good at organising meetings. The people who turn up at the meetings are not the people who we need to meet to. Well, actually, somebody needs to say that's not a productive use of time, and we need to go back to it and think again. We've gone through a process of lots of things over the years where tasks have been taken away from policing. We used to do parking enforcement, traffic, a lot more traffic regulation. Things have got automated so that you never actually engage with a police officer anymore. You don't have to come into front counters. You can do things in other ways. So lots of those sorts of tasks have been taken out, but I don't think we've really got to, we're not spending enough time as managers looking at are our officers working productively. And you will continually come across, if you go in with open eyes, you will keep coming across stuff that is not productive. A short while ago, it's about 18 months ago now, I worked on the review of rape and sexual offences investigation. And you see lots of things put into a process where you see an investigation has gone on for months with very specialist investigators and supervisors checking what the investigators are doing and management reviews and Crown prosecutors involved. The net result is nothing. Nothing has been progressed. They've made contact, a decision, let's refer it back, we'll speak to, we'll make another appointment, we'll go on, we'll request something else. And 6 months later, the case has not progressed. And as a victim, you're left there, what's happening? I've had a contact from the police officer, but my offender is still out there. I'm waiting for apparently for something else to come back, but I don't know what it is. Yes, they've been ringing me. Yes, they've been contacting, but my case is not progressing. And very few people are actually standing back. And that was something with the Soteria Bluestone process, I think, was that you did have people looking at it and saying, this is not a productive use of time. And I think that's the way where we need to encourage the managers to, I'm calling them managers because I think this is it's a bit of management and it's a bit of leadership, because the leadership is then figuring out, okay, how do I change this? What's the answers and how do I come up with different solutions? But the management bit is looking at rather than just blindly following the process. Every 3 months you have to do this. Every 2 weeks you have to make a victim contact. It's not productive and I'm not producing anything. Let's make a leadership decision about how we change that.
I think there's probably just two things I would flag, and I know it's been debated for years, but I still think it's unresolved. So missing persons. I wrote about this over a decade ago. The way in which public authorities respond to missing, or I should say, respond to reports of missing persons is disproportionate and falls largely on the police. Hospital guarding, again, sometimes tied to that and sometimes not. I was out with the police in Luton a couple of weeks ago on a Friday night, and 3 police officers were tied up for a single intoxicated individual who was already cuffed, and that took them hours. And Friday night in Luton is busy, right? So, and in terms of leadership and Ian's point, absolutely. I mean, I haven't seen it recently, but Joe Farrell, who's the Chief Constable of Police Scotland, spoke out quite recently saying this is unsustainable. We shouldn't be doing this. We need a different model for what is done with people once they are safely delivered to a place of clinical care, because our officers are spending all of their shift acting as security guards, and that's not what we need them to be doing. So it does require some leadership from within policing actually to make the argument and to see if we can't get to some sort of better arrangement with the NHS and with other partners that are in the mix here.
Assemblymember Hall.
The Commissioner did do that with mental health issues, and I was thrilled to bits because I've spent hours in hospitals with the police while they're just sitting there. My question is just going to be such a long answer, but you've answered some of it. It's about can new technology allow policing in London to be more effective? Well, of course it can, and that's my concern over this losing of the Palantir contract. I mean, you have said, Tom, that there's lots and lots of data out there. So if I just ask very briefly, do you think with all of that data that the police force is capable of getting somebody in to put all of that together, which is what this contract was supposed to do? And will it shortcut a lot of issues and save money, basically?
Yes and no. So yes, obviously we have all this data, and you can just read our papers, and it has a real impact. The issue is, is Palantir the right answer, or having something more local, homegrown, the right answer? And that goes to industrial policy. We want to grow people, and we have the skills in London to do the same thing. What Palantir is doing, why are we not doing it locally?
Because we're not. Can I just say this is absolutely fascinating? I'll hand back because of time, but thank you. Absolutely fascinating.
There are a couple of things. I think the benefits of looking through the sorts of things that Palantir or other sort of artificial intelligence, whatever, can do. There's one thing there's a few things that I'd want to say, which is some of these things can actually generate more work. So you have to pay for the system. So what was 50 million for Palantir? So that's not a small amount. That's cash. It might generate lots of investigation leads. The facial recognition generates lots of hits that then require following up. A risk assessment tool might identify lots of risk issues that then need managing. Someone's got to respond to that information. So it's all good stuff. If somebody can join these dots together and make the connections, it's great. But you are putting potentially extra work into the system. More arrests, more investigation leads, more custody cases, more prosecutions. And
more
that
results
can cause a problem.
So more results, which would bring up the trust and confidence, which is such a subject that we really should be concentrating on. Trust and confidence in the police has plummeted, and that needs to be addressed. But
so I think there's lots of operational advantages, and I don't think we should be shy about what the potential could be for AI. I think the College of Policing is looking at 4 different vendors, if you like, or products that are currently on the market, one of them being Palantir. But I think you should talk also to Bedfordshire. I've seen that platform running in Bedfordshire and the City of London Police as well, who are, I believe, using it with the relaunched Report Fraud platform as well. So it is already in policing. It's not a question of whether or not it's being used, but based on the session earlier, I think it was implied that it's an ongoing discussion with an open procurement, and at that point it becomes an open tender and an open procurement for the best technology. But there are multiple vendors out there, and this market will only grow actually in terms of what it can deliver for public services.
The trouble with big organisations like the Metropolitan Police, everything's so damn slow. By the time decisions are made, technology particularly has moved on and on and on, and we really need that assistance now, I would argue. Thank you, Chair.
Following the theme of time, moving on and on and on, we are a bit over time, so I'm going to jump straight to our final question from Assembly Member Harani.
Thank you, Chair. Just on the issue about the changing nature of crime, particularly the growth in online and fraud-related offending. So I'm going to turn to each of you, but maybe yourself, Professor Tom Kirchmeier, first. How should this be reflected in a modern urban police workforce model?
So we are actively working on fraud. And the issue with fraud is obviously we have lots of victims, but we don't have a perpetrator because the perpetrator sits somewhere across the world. And I've been on record for a decade or more that you obviously have lots of state actors who kind of survive on defrauding Londoners and everybody around the world. So it's a very professional industry, and the best thing you can do is actually harden these, protect the victims. I call it by hardening households, educate them that they're a likely victim. So when you look at the data, you have actually real high risk areas. areas where it's much more likely to be, defrauded for a particular type. And what we started doing with the Home Office is actually communicating with them either via leaflet or with an officer visit. And what we're trying to do now with the Met Police is actually kind of communicate them via social media channels, because it allows us to give very small areas where we can actually serve them with some advertisement and information. And so we try to target the information very closely to the high-risk groups.
Ian?
Right, so the balance, the profile of crime is changing. So we're seeing fewer of the traditional crimes, more of the online offending and the fraud offences and other cyber-related crimes. So British policing needs to make sure it has some capability, greater capability, to tackle these threats. So a lot of the proposals in the white paper to beef up central capabilities, national capabilities, are fully endorsed. There is still this middle tier that Tom perhaps talks about. At a local level, at a force level, somebody needs to get a grip of it's fraud, it's happening, it's somebody who's got hold of a credit card and has tried to get something at a shop, and somebody's rung police, and then how do we respond to that? And you find that the local policing just doesn't have the capability quite often to be able to respond to that. And the powers aren't there. So things like, my mobile phone is inside that house. Can I go in and get it? Well, we're seeing some changes along that front. But eBay fraud, there's a lot of stuff that is happening at the middle level that local policing isn't geared up to, hasn't got the skills, hasn't got the capability, hasn't got the specialist tools. And actually, we need to start thinking that maybe I need those things at a local level. I can't just leave it to the National Fraud Squad, to the Force Specialist Division that is swamped with bigger jobs. So we'll leave that gap is opening up, and it needs some skilling up at the middle level.
Yeah, I would just add to the police reform point by saying that most of your workforce decisions are bound up with the costs of a very antiquated, very rigid employment structure for police officers, which hasn't changed significantly for decades, all laid down in statute through police regulations. And of course there are some benefits to that, and it provides some stability and a degree of resilience and flexibility, but the crime demands on police are now so much more complicated that you can do a few things around the edges, but fundamentally most of your money and most of your workforce is tied into a career structure and an employment structure that's totally unsuited to being able to onboard the skills that you need to address the demand that you're expected to match. So I think unless this government or a future government takes workforce reform seriously and looks again at how the policing workforce can be made a lot more diverse, a lot more flexible, allow people to serve for much shorter periods of time, leave policing and come back, bring people in much later, mid-career professionals from the tech sector, pay them properly, attract the right talent and skills that you need. The police can't do any of that at the moment. And so their hands are really tied, and I think there's a question there for national politicians, because ultimately it's all in legislation, and it won't change unless the workforce is modernised.
And of course, work with more academics.
Of course.
The right sort of academics, applied.
Thank you very much. I think it's been a really fascinating discussion for our second panel. Thank you. Apologies for overrunning slightly, but I think that's perhaps an indication of how interesting that discussion was. So I've got to thank the three of you for your time this afternoon. You're now free to leave. We have a couple of little bits of housekeeping just to finish off. So could I ask the committee to note the report and the discussion and delegate authority to me as chairman in consultation with party group lead members to agree any output arising from the meeting? Can I ask the committee to note the report on payments over £250 Can I ask the committee to note the work programme meeting dates as agreed by the London Assembly at its annual meeting on the 11th of May 2026. Next meeting of the committee is scheduled for the 9th of July 2026 at 10 a.m. in the chamber here at City Hall, where we'll be looking at GLAP. I have no urgent business today, so that concludes today's meeting. Thanks, everyone.